Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. The night whispered secrets I wasn't meant to hear. As I trudged through the dense undergrowth, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong in my forest. My name is Akira Tanaka, and I've been a park ranger at Mount Takao National Forest for the past 7 years. I know these woods like the back of my hand, every trail, every stream, every rocky outcrop. But tonight, something felt different. Off. It started with the footprints. I was doing my usual night patrol, checking for illegal campers or signs of poachers. The moon hung low and heavy in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. That's when I saw them, a set of tracks unlike anything I'd ever encountered before. At first, I thought it might be a bear. We get the occasional Asian black bear wandering through, though they're rare. But as I crouched down to examine the prints more closely, my blood ran cold. These weren't bear tracks. They were unmistakably bipedal, but massive, easily twice the size of my own boot print. I've seen plenty of strange things in my years as a ranger, but this was something else entirely. I radioed back to base. "Tanaka here. I've found some unusual tracks near Biwa Creek, requesting backup to investigate." Static crackled over the line before a response came through. "Copy that, Akira. What kind of tracks?" I hesitated, not wanting to sound crazy. "Not sure. Large, bipedal. Possibly human, but bigger than any human I've ever seen." There was a long pause. "All right. Yamamoto is on his way. ETA 30 minutes. Be careful out there." "Roger that," I replied, trying to keep the unease out of my voice. I decided to follow the tracks while waiting for backup. They led deeper into the forest, away from the main trails. As I moved further in, the trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The silence was the next thing that struck me. Usually the forest at night is alive with sound, the hoot of owls, the rustle of small nocturnal animals, the chirp of insects. But now, an eerie quiet had fallen over everything. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Crack! The sound of a branch snapping echoed through the stillness, causing me to whirl around, my heart pounding. My flashlight beam darted frantically from tree to tree, searching for the source of the noise. Nothing. But then I felt it, that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. I tried to steady my breathing, forcing myself to remain calm. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and fragile in the vast darkness. "This is Ranger Tanaka. Is anyone there?" No response, just that oppressive silence. I turned back to the track, determined to solve this mystery. But as I took another step forward, a new scent hit me. A powerful, musky odor that made my nose wrinkle in disgust. It was like nothing I'd ever smelled before, part wild animal, part decay, and something else I couldn't quite place. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Akira, it's Yamamoto. I'm at the trailhead. What's your location?" I fumbled for the radio, my hands shaking slightly. "I'm about 2 kilometers in, following the creek. The tracks lead off trail to the east." "Copy that. I'm on my way. Stay put." But something told me I couldn't wait. Whatever had made those tracks was close. I could feel it. And I needed answers. I pressed on, the beam of my flashlight sweeping back and forth across the forest floor. The tracks were getting fresher, the indentations deeper and more defined. Whatever made them had passed through here recently. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite a groan. It was something in between, something primal and ancient that sent shivers down my spine. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I raised my flashlight, sweeping it in a wide arc around me. And there, just at the edge of the beam's reach, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. Two eyes, reflecting the light like twin flames in the darkness. They were set high off the ground, far taller than any animal I knew, and they were staring directly at me. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, the flashlight flying from my grasp and disappearing into the underbrush. Darkness engulfed me. I could hear heavy breathing, not my own, getting closer. The musky scent grew stronger, almost overwhelming. With trembling hands, I reached for my radio. Yamamoto, I whispered, afraid to raise my voice. I need immediate assistance. There's something out here, something big. Static was my only reply. I heard movement in the darkness, the sound of heavy footsteps and branches being pushed aside. It was coming closer. Panic overtook me. I scrambled to my feet, no longer caring about stealth or protocol. I ran. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the undergrowth, blind in the darkness. I could hear it behind me, giving chase. Its footfalls shook the ground. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like lead. But still, it pursued. Finally, I burst into a small clearing. The moonlight provided just enough illumination for me to see. I spun around, ready to face whatever was chasing me, but there was nothing there. The forest had gone deathly quiet again. No sound of pursuit, no heavy breathing, nothing. I stood there, gasping for air, my eyes darting wildly around the clearing. Had I imagined it all? Was the stress of the job finally getting to me? "Akira!" a voice called out, making me jump. Yamamoto emerged from the trees, flashlight in hand. "Are you all right? I heard you running. I've never been so glad to see another person in my life." "Taro," I gasped, still trying to catch my breath. "There's something out there, something big. I saw its eyes." Yamamoto's face creased with concern. He played his flashlight around the clearing. "I don't see anything. Are you sure?" A roar split the night, so loud it seemed to shake the very air around us. It was close, too close. Yamamoto's eyes widened in fear. "Run!" he shouted. We took off together, crashing through the underbrush. I could hear it behind us, gaining ground with every step. "The ranger station," Yamamoto panted as we ran. "If we can make it there." I nodded, too out of breath to speak. The station wasn't far, maybe a kilometer, but with that thing on our heels, it might as well have been 100 miles. We burst out onto one of the main trails, our boots pounding against the packed earth. The sound of pursuit grew fainter. Were we outpacing it? Just as hope began to flicker in my chest, Yamamoto cried out. I turned to see him sprawled on the ground, clutching his ankle. "Go!" he shouted, his face contorted in pain. "Get help!" I hesitated for a split second, torn between helping my friend and saving myself. That moment of indecision nearly cost me everything. A massive shape burst from the tree line, all fur and muscle and rage. In the moonlight, I caught a glimpse of a face that was almost human, yet horribly, monstrously wrong. Yamamoto's scream jolted me into action. I grabbed his arm, hauling him to his feet. "Come on!" I yelled, half dragging him down the trail. The creature roared again, the sound reverberating through my very bones. I could feel its hot breath on the back of my neck. The ranger station loomed ahead, a beacon of safety in the darkness. With a final burst of desperate energy, we crossed the last few meters and threw ourselves through the door, slamming it shut behind us. I fumbled for the locks, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage it. Outside, something massive slammed against the door, making the whole building shudder. "The rifle!" Yamamoto gasped, pointing to the gun cabinet. I grabbed the rifle and loaded it with trembling hands, then took up position by the window. The attack on the door had stopped, but I could hear heavy breathing just outside. For what felt like hours, we waited in tense silence, jumping at every sound. But the creature didn't return. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, we finally dared to relax slightly. Whatever had chased us seemed to have retreated with the coming of day. Later, When we reported the incident, nobody believed us. They said we must have encountered a bear, or maybe a wild boar. The tracks I had found earlier had been obscured by our frantic flight through the forest. But Yamamoto and I knew the truth. There was something out there in the woods, something that defied explanation. And though I still patrol the forest, I never go out at night anymore. Some mysteries, I've learned, are better left unsolved. Story 2. The thing about the woods at night is that they breathe, not just the trees or the wind shifting the branches, but the earth itself. The ground creaks, the shadows sway, and the sounds you can't quite place always feel like they're just behind you. For a guy like me, a ranger patrolling the backwoods at night, that should be old news. But tonight felt different. It wasn't the normal hum of the forest that got under my skin. It was something else entirely. Something wrong. It was a little after 11 p.m., and the only reason I was still out on this godforsaken back road was because of a call about some kids messing around at the old lookout point. Teenagers usually love that spot. Sneak out there to drink or whatever. Harmless enough most of the time, but it's my job to check. So I drove the old ranger truck down the dirt path that wound deeper into the forest, my headlights cutting through the thick blackness. The road got rougher, bumpier. Should have stayed in bed, I muttered to myself, gripping the steering wheel as the truck jolted over another pothole. The radio crackled faintly on the seat beside me, but otherwise it was dead silent in the cab. Then something darted across the road, not like a deer, too fast for that, more like a shadow but solid, big enough to make me hit the brakes hard. The truck skidded slightly, tires crunching on loose gravel. I stared out into the trees, scanning the darkness. My heart hammered, but there was nothing, just the usual shapes of the woods, the gnarled trunks and low branches stretching out like skeletal hands. I swore under my breath, gripping the door handle. My mind was playing tricks on me, had to be. Still, something didn't sit right. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out of the truck, and left the engine running just in case. The beam cut through the thick night air, bouncing off the trees as I walked toward the spot where I thought I saw something. The forest swallowed me up the moment I stepped off the road. That eerie quietness followed. No birds, no bugs, not even the wind. Just that heavy, pressing silence, the kind that made you feel like you were being watched. My boots crunched on the underbrush as I moved carefully, sweeping the light in slow arcs. There, on the ground. I crouched down. A set of tracks, big, deep, way too large for a person, and not from any animal I'd seen around here. Bear, maybe, but these prints had an odd shape to them. Almost human, but not quite. I stood up, scanning the trees again. That prickling feeling on the back of my neck hadn't let up. Something was definitely off. "Jake," I muttered, "you're letting the woods get to you. Pull it together, man." But as I turned to head back to the truck, I heard it. A low, rumbling breath. Not from me. It came from somewhere deeper in the woods, just out of reach of my flashlight's beam. Instinct kicked in. I straightened up, body tense, listening hard. Another sound, this time closer, something heavy shifting its weight. My mouth went dry. "Anyone out there?" I called out, hating how shaky my voice sounded. No response. Just that breathing again, louder now, followed by the unmistakable crack of a branch underfoot. My pulse raced, every hair on my body standing on end. I backed up slowly, keeping the light in front of me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there was closing in. It wasn't some animal. This was something different, and it was watching me. I took a deep breath, fighting to keep control. The flashlight beam flickered. Damn it! Batteries had to pick now to start dying. I quickened my pace back to the truck, heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to get out. The weight of the silence pressed down harder. Then I heard it. A snarl, low and guttural, like nothing I'd ever heard before. I turned on instinct, shining the light into the woods. The beam caught something just for a split second. Two yellow eyes, reflecting the light back at me, staring from the darkness. Then they were gone. I bolted for the truck. My boots slipped on the loose dirt, nearly sending me sprawling, but I managed to keep my balance and reach the driver's side door. The engine was still running, thank God. I yanked the door open and jumped inside, slamming it shut, locking it in the same motion. Breathing hard, I shoved the truck into gear and peeled out, tires spitting gravel. The headlights bounced as I tore down the road, my hands shaking on the wheel. The road was nothing but a blur of trees and darkness. I couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting those eyes to be right there behind me. I didn't stop driving until I hit the main road again, where the forest began to thin out. I pulled over, chest heaving, trying to calm down. My hands were still trembling as I killed the engine and sat in the quiet, listening. Nothing but the soft hum of the truck cooling down. Jesus, I muttered, leaning back in the seat, wiping the sweat from my forehead. What the hell did I just see? My radio crackled to life. Jake, you out there? Over. It was Ron, another ranger on the late shift. I grabbed the radio, still feeling on edge. Yeah, I'm here, I replied, my voice a little too tight. What's up? You find those kids? No, didn't see anyone out there. Something else, though. The pause on the other end felt heavier than the silence that had swallowed the woods. What do you mean? I don't know. Something big. Almost hit it with the truck. Saw tracks, but... I hesitated. I didn't even know how to explain it. Something's off out there, Ron. It wasn't an animal, not like anything I've seen before. Another pause. This time longer. You get a look at it? He asked finally. Just eyes. It was watching me. Damn. Ron's voice lowered, like he was talking more to himself than to me. You didn't go after it, did you? Hell no. I'm not that stupid. Another long pause. When Ron spoke again, his tone had changed. Listen, Jake, you need to get out of there. I've heard some things lately. You're not the first to see something weird in those woods. I frowned, gripping the radio tighter. What are you talking about? Couple of hikers went missing last month, up by the old lookout, and another guy, a hunter, swears he saw something too. Same kind of thing. Big, fast, not like any animal he could place. I stared out at the dark road ahead, my pulse spiking again. And no one thought to mention this earlier? Didn't want to spook anyone, Ron replied. You know how it is, but now that you've seen it, look, just stay clear of that area for a while. There's something out there, something dangerous. I swallowed hard, glancing back in the direction of the forest. The silence on the other end of the radio felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on my chest. All right, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but someone's got to go out there eventually. Not tonight, they don't, Ron replied, his voice firm. Get back here. We'll talk about it in the morning. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Yeah, I'm heading back now. I hung up the radio and started the truck again, the low rumble of the engine somehow comforting after the suffocating silence of the woods. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there wasn't finished, and neither was I. Those woods, those eyes, something was waiting in the dark, and eventually I'd have to face it again, but not tonight. Tonight, I was just grateful to be getting the hell out of there. Story 3. The howl that pierced the night wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It sent chills down my spine and made me question everything I thought I knew about these woods. My name's Akira Tanaka, and I've been a forest ranger for all of 3 weeks. Tonight was my first solo night patrol, and I was determined to prove myself. The senior rangers had their doubts about me, the city boy who'd never spent a night alone in the wilderness. But I was ready to show them what I was made of, or so I thought. The moon hung low and full in the sky, casting long shadows through the dense pines. My boots crunched softly on the forest floor as I made my way along the trail, flashlight sweeping back and forth. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. It was peaceful, almost serene. Then I heard it, a sharp crack that echoed through the trees. I froze, my hand instinctively going to the bear spray on my belt. Heart pounding, I slowly panned my light in the direction of the sound. Nothing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast darkness. "Anyone there?" Silence answered me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. It was probably just a deer or something. No big deal. I'd seen plenty of wildlife during my training patrols. I continued down the trail, but now every rustle of leaves and snapping twig had me on edge. The shadows seemed to deepen, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Another crack, louder this time and much closer. I whirled around, my light catching a flash of movement. Something large disappeared behind a thick trunk. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking slightly. "This is a protected area. Identify yourself." More silence, but then a low, rumbling growl that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. This was no deer. I fumbled for my radio. "Base, this is Tanaka. I've got a possible large predator encounter on the North Trail, requesting backup." Static crackled, then a bored voice came through. "Copy that, Tanaka. What kind of predator?" I hesitated. "I'm not sure. It's big, though. Bigger than a bear, I think." A pause. "Tanaka, there's nothing out there bigger than a bear. You sure you're not just jumpy?" I felt a flash of anger. "I know what I saw. Something's out here." All right. Sit tight. We'll send Johnson your way. ETA 30 minutes. 30 minutes. I'd be fine. I just needed to stay calm and... A deafening roar shattered the night, so close it felt like it was right on top of me. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root and landing hard on my back. My flashlight went flying, its beam cutting wildly through the trees before going dark. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet. In the moonlight, I could make out a massive shape moving between the trees. It was easily 8 feet tall, walking on 2 legs but hunched over like some nightmarish fusion of man and beast. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion. But as the creature let out another bone-chilling howl, I knew this was all too real. I ran. Branches whipped at my face as I tore through the underbrush, no longer caring about staying on the trail. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but pure adrenaline kept me going. I could hear it crashing through the forest behind me, gaining ground with each passing second. A fallen log loomed in front of me. I vaulted over it, but my foot caught on the edge. I went down hard, pain shooting through my ankle. Gritting my teeth, I dragged myself behind the log, trying to make myself as small as possible. The creature's heavy footsteps slowed, and I could hear it sniffing the air. My heart was pounding so loud, I was sure it would give me away. I closed my eyes, silently praying to whatever might be listening. A twig snapped right next to me. I opened my eyes to see a massive clawed hand gripping the log. Slowly, a head rose into view, a twisted mix of wolf and human features, with glowing yellow eyes that locked onto mine. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This was it. This was how I died. The creature's mouth opened, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. But instead of attacking, it spoke. The voice was deep and guttural, barely recognizable as words. "Leave. This. Place." I blinked, sure I must be hallucinating, but when I opened my eyes again, the creature was gone. Only the sound of rustling leaves and distant howl remained. I don't know how long I lay there, shaking and gasping for breath. Eventually, I heard voices calling my name. Johnson and the backup team had arrived. When they found me, I was a mess, covered in dirt and scratches, ankle swollen, and babbling about monsters in the woods. They assumed I'd had some kind of panic attack and imagined the whole thing. But as they helped me limp back to the ranger station, Johnson suddenly stopped. His flashlight beam had caught something on the ground. "What the hell?" he muttered, crouching down. There, pressed into the soft earth, was a footprint, but not like any I'd ever seen before. It was massive, easily twice the size of a man's foot, with clear impressions of long, curved claws. Johnson looked up at me, his face pale in the moonlight. "Tanaka, what exactly did you see out there?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I possibly explain what I'd encountered? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, maybe I was crazy. But as I stared at that impossible footprint, I knew one thing for certain. These woods held secrets far darker and stranger than I could have ever imagined. And somehow, I doubted this would be my last encounter with the unknown. The next morning, I sat in the ranger station, nursing a cup of coffee and trying to make sense of the night's events. My ankle was wrapped tightly, a dull throb serving as a constant reminder that it hadn't all been a dream. Captain Rodriguez entered, his weathered face creased with concern. He pulled up a chair across from me, his dark eyes studying my face. "How you holding up, Tanaka?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. I shrugged, staring into my coffee. "I'm fine, sir, just a little shaken up." He nodded slowly. "Johnson told me about the footprint and the, other things you reported seeing." I tensed, waiting for the ridicule or disbelief. Instead, Rodriguez leaned in, lowering his voice. "Listen, kid, I've been working these woods for over 30 years, and in that time I've seen things that, well, let's just say they don't fit neatly into any scientific classification." I looked up, surprised. "You mean you believe me?" He held up a hand. "I'm not saying I believe in Bigfoot or werewolves or any of that nonsense, but I do know there are things out there we don't understand, things that don't show up in any guidebook." "So what was it?" I asked, desperate for some kind of explanation. Rodriguez sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Honestly, I don't know. Could have been a bear standing on its hind legs. Could have been your mind playing tricks on you in the dark, or—" He trailed off, his gaze distant. "Or what?" I prompted. He shook his head. "Never mind. The point is, you survived. That's what matters. But I need to know if you're up for this job, Tanaka. It's not just about pretty views and helping lost hikers. These woods can be dangerous, in ways you might not expect." I thought about the terror I'd felt, the certainty that I was about to die, but I also remembered the awe I'd experienced, facing something beyond my understanding. There was a whole world out there I knew nothing about, and despite the fear, part of me wanted to learn more. "I'm up for it, sir," I said, meeting his eyes. "Whatever's out there, I want to understand it, to protect people from it if necessary." Rodriguez studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right then. But from now on, no solo night patrols until you've got more experience under your belt. And Tanaka?" "Yes, sir. If you ever encounter anything unusual out there again, you come straight to me. Understood?" I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and trepidation. "Understood, sir." As I left the station that afternoon, my gear packed for a few days of mandatory leave, I couldn't help but scan the tree line. The forest suddenly seemed vaster, more mysterious than ever before. Whatever I'd encountered out there, whatever secrets these woods held, I knew my life had changed. The world was bigger and stranger than I'd ever imagined, and somehow I'd been given a glimpse behind the curtain. I may not have been ready for what I'd seen, but I was determined to be ready next time, because deep down I knew there would be a next time. The creature's words echoed in my mind, "Leave this place." But I couldn't leave. Not now. Not when there was so much left to discover. As I drove away from the station, I caught movement in my rearview mirror. For just a second, I could have sworn I saw a tall, shadowy figure watching from the edge of the trees. But when I blinked, it was gone. I took a deep breath and kept driving. Whatever was out there, whatever mysteries these woods held, I'd be back, and next time I'd be prepared. The adventure, it seemed, was just beginning. Story 4. The mountains had always been our sanctuary, a place where Emma and I could escape the chaos of city life, but on that moonless night in the depths of the Cascade Range, our haven became a prison of terror. My name is Lars Eriksson, and I've been an avid outdoorsman all my life. My wife Emma and I had been planning this camping trip for months, eager to explore a remote area of the mountains known for its pristine wilderness. We'd heard rumors, of course, whispered stories of strange sightings and unexplained phenomena. Some called it Sasquatch territory. We'd laughed it off as local folklore. We're not laughing anymore. The day had started perfectly. We'd hiked deep into the backcountry, far from any marked trails or campsites. As the sun began to set, we found an ideal spot to pitch our tent, a small clearing nestled between towering pines, with a babbling creek nearby. "This is it," I said, dropping my heavy pack with a grunt. "What do you think, Em?" Emma surveyed the area, her green eyes sparkling with excitement. "It's perfect. God, I needed this. No cell phones, no emails, just us and nature." We set up camp efficiently, working together with the ease of a couple who've shared countless outdoor adventures. As darkness fell, we sat by our small campfire, sharing a meal of dehydrated stew and swapping stories. "Remember that time in Yellowstone when that bison decided to use our tent as a scratching post?" Emma laughed, her face glowing in the firelight. I chuckled at the memory. "How could I forget? I've never seen you move so fast." As the fire died down to embers, we decided to turn in for the night. The air had grown chilly, and I could see Emma shiver slightly as she zipped up her jacket. "Come on," I said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Let's get cozy in the tent." We crawled into our sleeping bags, the familiar sounds of the forest lulling us towards sleep, the gentle rustle of wind through pine needles, the distant hoot of an owl, the soft gurgle of the creek. It was nature's perfect lullaby. I was on the edge of sleep when I heard it. A snap of a twig, too loud to be a small animal. My eyes flew open, suddenly alert. "Lars," Emma whispered beside me. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, straining my ears. For a moment, all was quiet. Then came another sound, the unmistakable crunch of heavy footsteps on pine needles and fallen leaves. "Probably just a deer," I whispered back, trying to convince myself as much as her. But deep down, I knew this was different. The footsteps were too heavy, too deliberate. Emma's hand found mine in the darkness, squeezing tight. I could feel her pulse racing, matching my own. The footsteps grew closer, circling our campsite. Whatever it was big, much bigger than a deer. I thought of bears, of mountain lions, but this gait was different. It was walking on two legs. "Lars," Emma's voice was barely audible, tight with fear. "What is that?" Before I could answer, a new sound cut through the night, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate the very air around us. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, not quite animal, not quite human. It raised the hair on the back of my neck and sent a chill down my spine. The footsteps stopped directly outside our tent. I could hear heavy breathing, smell a musty, wild odor. A shadow fell across the tent fabric. Something large was standing right outside. Emma stifled a gasp, burying her face in my shoulder. I wrapped my arm around her, my mind racing. Our car was miles away. We had no weapons save for a small hunting knife. We were completely vulnerable. The creature outside sniffed audibly, and I knew it could smell us. My heart pounded so hard I was sure it must be audible. I held my breath, praying that whatever was out there would lose interest and move on. But it didn't move. It just stood there, its massive shadow looming over us. I could hear it breathing, slow and deep. It knew we were here. It was waiting. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My arm had gone numb from holding Emma, but I didn't dare move. The slightest sound might provoke the creature into action. Then, slowly, deliberately, the zipper of our tent began to move. Emma's fingernails dug into my arm. I clenched my jaw, every muscle in my body tensing. Fight or flight instinct screamed at me to do something, anything, but I remained frozen in place. The zipper inched upward, agonizingly slow. A gap appeared at the bottom of the tent flap. In the faint starlight, I caught a glimpse of something that turned my blood to ice. A massive, hair-covered hand, ending in thick, curved claws. "Oh, God," Emma whimpered beside me. The hand paused, then withdrew. For a moment I dared to hope it was leaving. But then a face pressed against the gap, a face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It was vaguely simian, with a broad, flat nose and heavy brow, but the eyes were disturbingly intelligent, gleaming with a primal cunning that was all too human. They locked onto mine, and in that moment I knew we were dealing with something far beyond ordinary wildlife. The face disappeared, but I could still feel its presence just outside. The zipper began moving again, opening our tent to the night. "Lars," Emma's voice shook. "What do we do?" I made a split-second decision. "When I say go," I whispered, "we run. Head for the creek. Don't look back. Just run." She nodded, her body tense as a coiled spring beside me. The zipper was halfway up now. I could see a massive, shadowy form through the widening gap. It was now or never. "Go!" I yelled, unzipping our sleeping bags in one fluid motion. We burst out of the tent like startled rabbits, nearly colliding with the towering figure outside. Up close, the creature was even more terrifying. Easily 8 feet tall, covered in thick, matted fur. It roared, a sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath our feet. I pushed Emma ahead of me. "Run!" I shouted, risking a glance back. The creature was giving chase, its long arms swinging as it loped after us. Its speed was terrifying. It was gaining on us with every stride. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. I could hear the thunder of its footsteps right behind us, feel its hot breath on the back of my neck. The sound of rushing water grew louder. We were nearing the creek. "Almost there!" I gasped, my lungs burning. We burst out of the tree line onto the rocky creek bank. Without hesitation, we plunged into the icy water. It was deeper than I expected, the current swift and strong. Emma cried out as she lost her footing, but I grabbed her arm, pulling her along. "Keep going," I urged, fighting against the current. We struggled to the opposite bank, hauling ourselves out of the water. I turned, fully expecting to see the creature right behind us, but the other side of the creek was empty. The monster had stopped at the water's edge. It paced back and forth, letting out frustrated growls. Could it not swim? Or was it simply unwilling to follow us into the water? Emma and I stood there, soaked and shivering, watching in terrified awe. The creature locked eyes with me one last time, and I swear I saw something like disappointment in its gaze. Then, with a final roar that echoed through the mountains, it turned and loped back into the forest. We didn't move for a long time, too shocked and scared to do anything but cling to each other. As the adrenaline wore off, the cold began to set in. "We need to move," I finally said, my teeth chattering. "We have to get back to the car." Emma nodded, her face pale in the starlight. What was that thing, Lars?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but I don't think we're safe here." We spent the rest of the night hiking back to our vehicle, jumping at every sound, half expecting the creature to return. We left all our gear behind, too afraid to return to the campsite. As we drove down the mountain, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon, Emma turned to me. "We're never going to tell anyone about this, are we?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. "Who would believe us?" She nodded, then leaned her head against the window, her eyes on the forests passing by outside. "Do you think it's still out there?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Something was out there in those mountains, something that defied explanation. And as much as I tried to rationalize what we'd seen, to explain it away as a bear or some other known animal, I couldn't shake the memory of those eyes, wild yet intelligent, curious yet predatory. We never went camping in that area again. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I find myself looking out at the distant mountains, wondering about what lurks in their shadowy depths. And I know that the next time I hear a story about Sasquatch, I won't be so quick to laugh it off, because now I know some legends have teeth. Story 5. The shutter clicked, capturing the misty dawn breaking over the ancient forest. I lowered my camera, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. Something was watching me. I could feel it. My name is Emma Larson, wildlife photographer and reluctant cryptid hunter. I never set out to chase legends, but here I was, camped out in the heart of Sasquatch country, hoping to catch a glimpse of the impossible. I'd been in these woods for 3 days, following whispered stories and blurry photos. Most of my colleagues thought I was crazy, throwing away my career on a wild goose chase. But I knew what I'd seen in that grainy trail cam footage. Something big, something that shouldn't exist. The forest was coming alive around me, birds calling out their morning songs. I packed up my gear, ready to head back to camp for some much-needed coffee. That's when I heard it. A low, rumbling sound that didn't belong. My heart rate spiked as I slowly turned, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Just shadows and mist. I shook my head, trying to clear the paranoia. Lack of sleep was making me jumpy. I needed to focus. Back at camp, I set about making breakfast, the familiar routine helping to settle my nerves. As I waited for the water to boil, I flipped through the photos on my camera's display. Lots of beautiful landscapes, a few interesting animal shots, but nothing earth-shattering. A twig snapped somewhere in the forest, loud enough to make me jump. I peered into the trees, but saw only shifting shadows. The feeling of being watched intensified. "Hello!" I called out, immediately feeling foolish. If there was something out there, I doubted it would answer. Silence. Then another snap, closer this time. I grabbed my camera, heart pounding. This could be it, the shot that would change everything. Slowly I raised the viewfinder to my eye, finger hovering over the shutter button. The mist swirled, revealing glimpses of movement between the trees. Something large, bipedal. My breath caught in my throat as a massive, shadowy figure emerged from the fog. It was at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur. Before I could focus, it vanished back into the forest. The shutter clicked frantically as I tried to capture something, anything, but when I checked the display, all I saw were blurry shapes and mist. "No, no, no," I muttered, frustration building. I'd been so close. The rest of the day passed in a blur of hypervigilance and disappointment. Every rustle of leaves had me whirling around, camera at the ready. But whatever I'd seen that morning seemed to have vanished. As night fell, I huddled in my tent, reviewing the day's photos. Nothing. Not a single frame showed anything conclusive. I was starting to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. A gust of wind rattled the tent, and I zipped up my sleeping bag, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was out here. Alone in the wilderness, chasing monsters. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of dark shapes and glowing eyes. I jolted awake several times, sure I'd heard something moving outside, but each time I peeked out, I saw only moonlit trees and shadows. It was the deepest part of the night when I heard it. A heavy, rhythmic breathing right outside my tent. My whole body went rigid, ears straining to make sense of the sound. Thump, thump, thump. Footsteps, heavy ones, circling my campsite. I reached for my flashlight with trembling hands, heart thundering in my chest. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for, but now that it was here, terror threatened to overwhelm me. Slowly, I unzipped the tent flap, wincing at every sound. I poked my head out, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing. But the footsteps continued, always just out of sight. Whatever it was toying with me. "Hello?" I called out, voice shaking. "Is someone there?" A low, rumbling growl answered me, sending ice through my veins. It was close, too close. I scrambled out of the tent, flashlight sweeping wildly. In the beam's edge, I caught a glimpse of movement. Something massive ducking behind a tree. "Wait!" I shouted, grabbing my camera. This was my chance. I had to get the shot. I plunged into the forest, following the sound of snapping branches and heavy footfalls. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to turn back, to get to safety, but I was too far gone, driven by a mix of fear and desperate curiosity. The chase led me deeper into the woods, away from the safety of my camp. I stumbled over roots and rocks, gasping for breath, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Suddenly the sound ceased. I found myself in a small clearing, moonlight filtering through the canopy. My flashlight beam danced across the trees, searching. "Where are you?" I whispered, more to myself than anything else. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, camera raised, and there it was. Standing at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by shadows, was a creature straight out of legend. Massive, easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur. Its face was a strange blend of ape and human features, with deep-set eyes that reflected my flashlight beam. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My finger rested on the shutter button, but I couldn't bring myself to take the shot. This felt sacred somehow. The creature tilted its head, studying me with an intelligence that sent shivers down my spine. Then, slowly, it raised one enormous hand, not in threat, but almost like a greeting. I lowered my camera, heart pounding. "Hello," I said softly, hardly believing what I was seeing. The creature made a low, rumbling sound, not quite speech, but not animal either. It took a step forward into a shaft of moonlight. That's when I saw the scars, deep gashes across its chest and arms, some old, some fresh. This wasn't just some undiscovered primate. This was a survivor, a being that had managed to exist alongside us for centuries, always hiding, always hunted. I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of shame. How many of its kind had been driven to extinction by our relentless expansion? How lonely must its existence be? "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears pricking at my eyes. "We've done this to you, haven't we?" The creature tilted its head again, as if considering my words. Then, with surprising grace for its size, it turned and melted back into the forest. "Wait!" I called out, but it was gone. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. When I finally made my way back to camp, the sky was starting to lighten with the first hints of dawn. As I approached my tent, I noticed something was wrong. The campsite was in disarray, gear scattered everywhere. My heart sank as I saw my camera bag, ripped open and empty. I rushed to check my tent. My laptop was gone, along with the memory cards containing all my photos. Even my phone was missing. Sinking to my knees, I let out a bitter laugh. Of course, No, they had been smart enough to remove all evidence of their existence. I'd been played. As the sun rose over the ancient forest, I began packing up what remained of my gear. Part of me wanted to be angry, to feel cheated out of the discovery of a lifetime. But mostly, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had seen something extraordinary, something that challenged everything I thought I knew about the world, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As I hiked out of the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, but this time it didn't feel threatening. It felt protective. I stopped at the trailhead, turning to look back at the misty forest one last time. For a moment I could have sworn I saw a large, shadowy figure standing among the trees, but when I blinked, it was gone. I smiled, shouldering my pack. "Goodbye," I whispered. "And thank you." As I drove away, I knew my life would never be the same. I had glimpsed a world beyond human understanding, a reminder that there were still mysteries out there waiting to be discovered. My camera was gone, along with any proof of what I'd seen, but I had my memories, and sometimes that's more valuable than any photograph. The truth was out there, and maybe, just maybe, it was better left hidden. Story 6. The shutter clicked, freezing the moment in digital eternity. But it wasn't until later, when I reviewed the images, that I realized I had captured something that shouldn't exist, something that was now far too close for comfort. My name is Mei Chen, and I'm a nature photographer. For the past decade, I've roamed the wildest corners of the earth, capturing the beauty and brutality of the natural world through my lens. But nothing in my experiences could have prepared me for what I encountered in the misty forests of the Pacific Northwest. It was supposed to be a routine assignment, a week in the Olympia National Forest, documenting the recovery of wolf populations. I'd been there countless times before, knew the terrain like the back of my hand. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't alone. The day had started like any other. I woke before dawn, the damp chill of the forest seeping into my bones as I crawled out of my tent. The mist hung low, transforming the towering cedars and firs into looming shadows. Perfect conditions for photography, if not for comfort. I packed my gear methodically, camera body, lenses, tripod, water, energy bars. The weight of the pack was familiar, almost comforting. I'd learned long ago to travel light but prepared. As I set out on the trail, the forest was just beginning to wake. Bird calls echoed through the canopy, a chorus of unseen life. The soft crunch of pine needles under my boots and the occasional snap of a twig were the only other sounds breaking the morning stillness. I'd been hiking for about an hour when I reached my usual spot, a small clearing overlooking a valley. It was a prime location for wildlife viewing, with a natural game trail leading down to a creek below. I set up my equipment with practiced efficiency, the routine as familiar as breathing, and then I waited. Patience is a photographer's greatest virtue, especially in wildlife photography. Hours can pass without a single worthwhile shot. But when that perfect moment comes, a wolf mid-leap, an eagle swooping down on its prey, it makes all the waiting worthwhile. The sun had climbed higher, burning off some of the mist when I saw it. At first, it was just a movement in my peripheral vision, a dark shape moving through the trees at the edge of the clearing. I swung my camera around, peering through the viewfinder. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. It was tall, far taller than any bear or elk I'd ever encountered, and it was walking upright on two legs. Through the lens, I could make out a muscular, hair-covered body, long arms swinging with each stride. Its face was obscured by the foliage, but I could have sworn I saw the glint of eyes looking in my direction. My finger moved on autopilot, the shutter clicking rapidly as I captured a series of shots. The creature paused, as if startled by the sound, then quickly melted back into the forest. Heart pounding, I lowered my camera. What had I just seen? My mind raced through possibilities. A bear standing on its hind legs, some sort of elaborate hoax. Or could it be? No. I shook my head, dismissing the thought. Sasquatch wasn't real. It couldn't be. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, going through the motions of my usual routine, but constantly scanning the tree line, half expecting the creature to reappear. It never did. As twilight approached, I made my way back to camp, my pack feeling heavier than usual with the weight of what I'd witnessed. I needed to review those photos to prove to myself that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. Back at my tent, I fired up my laptop and began transferring the day's images. My hands shook slightly as I clicked through them, anticipation building. And there it was. The image was slightly blurred. The creature had been moving after all, but it was unmistakably there. Tall, bipedal, covered in dark fur. It was partially obscured by branches, but what I could see defied any rational explanation. "Holy shit!" I whispered, leaning in closer to the screen. I zoomed in, trying to make out more details. The proportions were all wrong for a bear. The fur was too long and shaggy for a person in a suit. And the size, it had to be at least 8 feet tall. I was so engrossed in the image that I almost missed the sound, a twig snapping just outside my tent. I froze, suddenly acutely aware of how vulnerable I was. Slowly, I reached over and turned off my laptop, plunging the tent into darkness. I held my breath, straining my ears. Another snap, closer this time, then another. Something was moving around my campsite. My heart hammered in my chest as I weighed my options. I could make a run for it, but to where? My car was parked miles away at the trailhead. I could call for help, but cell service was non-existent out here. Or I could stay put and hope whatever was out there would lose interest and move on. A shadow fell across my tent, huge and unmistakably bipedal. I could hear deep, heavy breathing, smell a musky odor that was neither fully animal nor human. It was right outside, the creature from the photo, and it had found me. I reached for my flashlight with trembling hands, my mind racing. What did it want? Was it curious? Aggressive? I'd spent years studying animal behavior, but this was unprecedented. A low, rumbling vocalization came from just outside the tent, not quite a growl, not quite speech. It raised the hair on the back of my neck. "Hello!" I called out, my voice sounding small and weak. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just a photographer." The shadow shifted, and I heard what sounded like sniffing. Was it trying to catch my scent? Gathering every ounce of courage I possessed, I unzipped the tent flap. If I was going to die out here, I at least wanted to see my killer face to face. The sight that greeted me stole the breath from my lungs. It was even larger up close, easily towering over me. Thick, matted fur covered its body, dark in the moonlight. But it was the face that captivated me. A blend of ape-like features with disturbingly human eyes. Eyes that were staring directly into mine with an intelligence that shook me to my core. We regarded each other in tense silence, neither moving. I realized I was holding my breath and forced myself to exhale slowly. "What are you?" I whispered, more to myself than to the creature. To my utter shock, it cocked its head slightly as if considering my question. Then slowly, deliberately, it raised one massive hand and pointed at my laptop. My eyes widened in disbelief. "The photos? You want the photos?" The creature nodded, the gesture so human it was unsettling. With shaking hands, I reached back into the tent and retrieved my laptop. I opened it, wincing slightly at the sudden brightness of the screen. The creature leaned in, its musky scent overwhelming at this proximity. I pulled up the photos from earlier, showing the distant shot of the creature in the forest. It studied the image intently, then looked back at me. Its eyes seemed to hold a question. "I'm a photographer," I explained, not sure why I was talking to it as if it could understand. "I document nature, animals. I didn't mean to intrude." The creature considered this for a moment, then reached out one massive hand. Instinctively I flinched back, but it simply placed its palm on the laptop screen, right over its own image. The message was clear: delete it. I nodded, my throat dry. Okay, I'll delete it. All of them. I promise." As I went through the motions of erasing the photos, I couldn't help but marvel at the surreality of the situation. Here I was, complying with the wishes of a creature that wasn't supposed to exist. When the last photo was gone, I looked back up at the creature. "It's done. They're all gone." It nodded once, seemingly satisfied. Then, to my amazement, it reached into a sort of crude pouch made of woven bark, hanging at its side. From it produced a small, smooth stone, intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize. It held the stone out to me. Hesitantly, I took it. The stone was warm to the touch, almost seeming to pulse with an inner energy. "Thank you," I said, unsure of what else to say. The creature nodded once more, then turned and loped off into the forest with surprising grace for its size. Within moments, it had vanished into the shadows, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and a stone that shouldn't exist. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, clutching the stone and questioning everything I thought I knew about the natural world. By morning, I had made a decision. I packed up my gear and hiked back to my car, leaving the forest and its secrets behind. I never published any photos from that trip, never told anyone what I saw. Who would believe me anyway? But sometimes, on quiet nights, I take out that strange stone and wonder about what else might be hiding in the wild places of the world, just beyond the reach of our understanding. And I know that the next time I venture into the forest, I'll be looking at the shadows with new eyes, always searching for a glimpse of the impossible. Story 7. The light was perfect. The kind of soft golden hue that photographers dream about, the kind that paints the world in warm tones, makes the leaves glow and the sky burn with color. I was alone, standing on a ridge in the middle of nowhere, camera in hand, and all I could think was, this is exactly why I do this moment. But there was something else too, something I hadn't noticed at first. A shadow just at the edge of the frame, barely there, but watching. I'd been hiking since dawn, pushing myself farther than I probably should have, but the solitude, the isolation, was too good to pass up. It was rare to find a trail this untouched, this quiet, especially so close to the weekend. The longer I walked, the more it felt like the world was mine alone, just me and my camera, capturing the silence, the stillness. No other hikers, no distant chatter, just the wind moving through the pines and the steady crunch of my boots on the dirt. By the time the light started to shift, the sky bleeding into that golden hour I loved, I had reached a ridge that overlooked miles of untouched forest. Perfect. I set my pack down, pulling out my camera, adjusting the lens, my mind already framing the shot. The world was bathed in a soft amber light, the kind that made every photo look like magic, no matter what it was. I knelt, getting a better angle, and snapped a few shots, the satisfying click of the shutter breaking the silence. I was completely absorbed, focusing on the details, the way the shadows fell, the colors in the leaves, until something caught my eye. At first I didn't even register it, just a blur in the corner of the frame, barely noticeable. I zoomed in. A figure, far off, at the edge of the tree line, tall, almost human, but not quite. It stood too still, too rigid. I lowered the camera and scanned the horizon with my own eyes. Nothing, just trees and shadow, the light shifting slowly as the sun began to dip lower. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast in just the right way to look like something else. I'd seen it before. Photography played those kinds of tricks on you all the time, but something about it felt wrong. I snapped a few more shots, hoping to catch whatever it was again, but each frame came up empty. Nothing. "Come on, Maya," I muttered to myself, shaking my head. "You're just tired." I packed up my camera, deciding it was time to head back before I lost the light entirely. The trail wasn't easy, and the last thing I wanted was to stumble around in the dark. I slung my pack over my shoulder and started down, keeping an eye on the fading horizon. The woods seemed different on the way back, less welcoming. The silence, which had been peaceful earlier, felt heavier now, like it was watching me. I quickened my pace, the trail winding tighter through the trees, the light dimming faster than I'd expected. That's when I heard it. A twig snapping, close, too close. I stopped, my heart jumping into my throat, and turned slowly, scanning the trees behind me. Nothing, just shadows. But I knew I'd heard it, that unmistakable sound of something, or someone, stepping on a branch. "Hello?" I called, my voice louder than I intended. No answer, just the wind, rustling the branches high above. I stood there, listening hard, my breath shallow, waiting for something, anything, to move, to make a sound. But there was nothing, just that eerie silence pressing in all around me. I forced myself to start walking again, faster this time, keeping my eyes ahead. It was probably nothing, A deer, maybe, or a fox, something harmless. But then I heard it again. Another snap, closer. I froze, gripping the straps of my backpack, my pulse racing. "Who's there?" The words felt stupid the moment they left my mouth. I didn't expect an answer, but the silence that followed was worse. Something was out there. I could feel it, watching, waiting. I turned again, scanning the trees, and then I saw it. A figure, tall, too tall to be human. It was standing half-hidden in the shadows, just at the edge of the clearing. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't moving, but I could see it, this massive, hulking shape, blending into the dark. The light had faded enough that I couldn't make out any details, just the size. It was bigger than any person I'd ever seen, bigger than anyone should be. I took a step back, heart pounding so hard it hurt. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Bear? No, not a bear. It was standing too still, too upright. What the hell is that? I didn't wait to find out. I turned and started running, my boots pounding against the dirt as I tore down the trail. My breath came in ragged bursts, the trees blurring around me. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away from whatever was behind me. The trail twisted and turned, and I stumbled more than once, catching myself on low-hanging branches, my legs screaming from the effort. I glanced back only once, and that was enough to see that it was following me. The figure, closer now, moving faster than I thought something that big could move. But it wasn't running. It was walking, this slow, deliberate pace, like it knew I couldn't outrun it. Panic surged through me, making my legs burn as I pushed harder. There was no sound except for my own breathing, my boots hitting the ground, the pounding of my pulse in my ears. But I knew it was behind me. I could feel it. That heavy presence, that oppressive weight of being watched, chased. I wasn't going to make it back before dark. The realization hit me hard as I rounded another bend in the trail, the sky above me dimming to a deep blue, the last traces of daylight slipping away. My only chance was to lose it in the trees, to find somewhere to hide, to wait it out until morning. I veered off the trail, plunging into the thick underbrush, the branches tearing at my clothes, my pack bouncing hard against my back. I had no idea where I was going, just that I needed to get off the open path. My breath came in gasps now, sharp and painful, my legs burning from the effort. I ducked low, crawling under a fallen tree, and found myself in a small hollow hidden from view. My chest heaved as I pressed myself against the trunk, forcing my breath to slow. For a moment, everything was still, silent. Then I heard it. The slow, deliberate crunch of footsteps moving closer. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to steady the pounding in my chest. Stay quiet. Don't move. Don't breathe. The footsteps stopped, right above me. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat louder than the last. I could hear it breathing now, low, heavy. Whatever it was right there, standing just feet away from where I was hiding. I kept my eyes closed, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting for it to move again, waiting for it to leave. But it didn't. Instead, it crouched down. I could feel the shift in the air, the weight of it lowering itself to the ground. I bit down hard on my lip, fighting the urge to scream. It was close enough now that I could smell it, a pungent, earthy scent, like wet fur and decay. I opened my eyes just a fraction, and there it was. A massive figure hunched over, its back to me, barely visible in the dim light. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. The proportions were all wrong, the way it moved, the sheer size of it. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, my mind racing with panic. What the hell is it? The figure shifted again, and I thought for a brief, terrifying moment that it had seen me. But then it stood up, its movements slow and deliberate, and turned away, disappearing into the trees with that same slow pace. Like it had all the time in the world. I didn't move, not for a long time. I stayed there, pressed against the tree, waiting, listening, until the sounds of the forest slowly returned. The wind in the leaves, the distant call of a bird, the faint rustle of branches. It was gone. I waited until I was sure, until the sky was nearly black and the stars had started to come out. Then, slowly, painfully, I crawled out from my hiding spot and started walking. My legs were weak, trembling with exhaustion and fear, but I didn't stop. I kept moving, back toward the trail, back toward safety. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching me, just out of sight, just waiting. I didn't stop walking until I saw the lights of my car. By the time I reached it, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring out at the dark woods, my breath finally starting to steady. And in the distance, just at the edge of the tree line, I thought I saw something move, but I didn't wait to find out. Story 8. The blood trail shouldn't have been there. Not in this weather, not this time of year. But there it was, a stark crimson slash against the pristine white snow, and it was leading me somewhere I wasn't sure I wanted to go. My name's Liam O'Connor, and I've been hunting these woods for 30 years. I thought I knew every inch of this forest, every animal track, every hidden glade. But what I found that day shook me to my core. The morning had started like any other late-season hunt. I'd set out before dawn, rifle slung over my shoulder, breath fogging in the crisp air. A fresh layer of snow had fallen overnight, perfect for tracking. I was after elk, hoping to fill my freezer before the real cold set in. 3 hours in, and I hadn't seen so much as a hoof print. I was about to call it a day when I spotted it, that impossible trail of blood. What the hell, I muttered, crouching down to examine it closer. The blood was fresh, steam still rising from it in the cold air. Whatever had made this trail was big and badly hurt. My hunter's instinct kicked in, overriding the unease growing in my gut. I followed the trail, moving as quietly as I could through the snow-laden pines. The blood splatters grew larger, more frequent. Whatever I was tracking, it was losing a lot of blood fast. The trail led me to a small clearing, and that's when I saw it. My breath caught in my throat, rifle dropping to my side. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. In the center of the clearing lay the remains of an elk, but not like any elk I'd ever seen taken down. This thing had been torn apart, its massive body rent into pieces that were strewn across the blood-stained snow. The kill was fresh, steam still rising from the exposed innards. I'd seen predator kills before, bears, mountain lions, even the occasional wolf pack. But this was something else entirely. The sheer violence of it was staggering. Swallowing hard, I approached the carcass. That's when I noticed the tracks. Massive paw prints circled the kill site, easily twice the size of any bear print I'd ever seen. And there was something else about them, something that sent a chill down my spine. They looked almost human-like. A twig snapped somewhere behind me. I whirled around, rifle raised, heart pounding. Nothing, just silent, snow-covered trees. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Eyes boring into me from the shadows. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. If there was something out there, I'd just given away my position. Silence answered me. Then a low growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I backed away from the carcass, eyes darting from tree to tree. Whatever had done this was still here, and it wasn't happy about me intruding. Another growl, closer this time. I caught a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye, something large and dark slipping between the trees. "Easy now," I said, as much to myself as whatever was out there. "I'm not looking for trouble." A snarl was my only answer, followed by the sound of heavy footfalls circling the clearing. I tried to track the movement, but it was too fast, always just out of sight. My back hit a tree, and I realized I'd been unconsciously retreating. The smart move would be to get the hell out of there. But some primal part of me knew running would be a death sentence. Whatever this thing was, it was a predator, and predators chase, so I stood my ground, rifle at the ready, trying to control my ragged breathing. The circling continued, drawing closer with each pass. I could hear branches snapping under its weight, smell the musky odor of wet fur and blood. "Come on, then," I muttered. "Let's see you." As if in answer to my challenge, the creature emerged from the tree line, and in that moment I questioned everything I thought I knew about the natural world. It was massive, standing easily 8 feet tall on 2 legs. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur, a dirty grey-brown colour. But it was the face that struck me the most, a nightmarish blend of wolf and man, with the elongated snout full of razor-sharp teeth and eyes that burned with an unsettling intelligence. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I knew I should shoot, should do something, anything, but I was frozen, rifle hanging uselessly at my side. The creature tilted its head, studying me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then it spoke. The sound was guttural, more growl than word, but unmistakably language. "Leave!" I blinked, sure I must be hallucinating. What are you?" I managed to croak out. The thing's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of yellowed fangs. "Hungry," it growled. That broke the spell. I raised my rifle, finger tightening on the trigger, but before I could fire, the creature moved. One moment it was across the clearing, the next it was on me. A massive paw swatted the rifle from my hands, sending it spinning into the snow. Another blow caught me in the chest, knocking the wind out of me and sending me sprawling. I scrambled backward, gasping for breath, searching desperately for my weapon. The monster advanced slowly, savoring the hunt. My hand closed around something solid, a fallen branch. Not much, but better than nothing. I struggled to my feet, brandishing my makeshift weapon. "Stay back!" I shouted, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The creature paused, head tilting again in that unsettlingly human gesture. Was that amusement in its eyes? "Brave," it rumbled. "Stupid, but brave." I gripped the branch tighter, mind racing. This thing could tear me apart in seconds. Why was it toying with me? "What do you want?" I asked, voice shaking despite my best efforts. The creature's eyes narrowed. "Survival," it growled. "Same as you." I frowned, not understanding. "I'm not here to hurt you. I was just hunting. I didn't know—" "Always hunting," the thing snarled, cutting me off. "Your kind. Always pushing, taking, no room left." Realization dawned. This wasn't just some animal. This was something that had been pushed to the brink, forced to adapt and survive in a world that was leaving it behind. "I'm sorry," I said softly, lowering the branch. "We've done this to you, haven't we?" The creature regarded me silently for a long moment. Then, with shocking speed, it closed the distance between us. I flinched, expecting pain. Instead, I felt hot breath on my face as the thing leaned in close, its eyes boring into mine. "Tell no one," it growled, "or next time I hunt you." And then it was gone, melting into the forest with impossible silence for something so large. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Eventually, the cold began to seep in, snapping me back to reality. I retrieved my rifle with shaking hands, casting wary glances at the tree line. But I was alone now. I could feel it. The hike back to my truck was a blur. My mind kept replaying the encounter, trying to make sense of it. Part of me wanted to convince myself it had all been some kind of stress-induced hallucination, but I knew better. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the creature's words. "Tell no one." But how could I keep this to myself? I had seen something that would rewrite our understanding of the natural world, but then I thought about what would happen if I did tell someone. Scientists, government agents, hunters, they would descend on these woods like locusts, and they wouldn't stop until they had captured or killed every last one of these creatures. No, this wasn't my secret to tell. When I got home, I poured myself a stiff drink and sat down at my computer. I pulled up the local news sites, Forestry Service reports, anything that might give me a clue about what I'd seen, and there it was. Buried in the back pages of the local paper, a story about increased missing persons reports in the area. Hikers, campers, even a few hunters. All vanished without a trace. I closed the browser, a chill running down my spine. The creature's words echoed in my mind. "Next time, I hunt you." I knew then that my days of hunting were over. I couldn't go back into those woods, not with the knowledge of what was out there. But more than that, I couldn't be a part of pushing these creatures further into extinction. As I crawled into bed that night, I found myself hoping that whatever I'd encountered out there would survive, that it would find a way to coexist in a world that had no place for monsters. Because in the end, I wasn't sure who the real monster was, the creature in the woods, or the species that had driven it to such extremes. One thing was certain, the forest would never look the same to me again, and neither would humanity's place in the natural order. Story 9. The darkness swallowed me whole as I descended deeper into the cave's maw. Each step echoed off the damp walls, a reminder of how alone I was in this subterranean world. But as my flashlight beam caught something etched into the rock face, I realized with growing dread that I might not be alone after all. My name is Javier Morales, and I'm an amateur spelunker with a passion for exploring the unknown. For years, I'd heard whispers about a network of unexplored caves in the remote mountains of northern Spain. Local legends spoke of strange noises emanating from the earth, of shepherds who ventured too close and were never seen again. Most wrote it off as superstition, but I saw it as a challenge. It took months of research and preparation before I felt ready to tackle the cave system. I'd mapped out what little was known about the area, packed state-of-the-art caving equipment, and left a detailed itinerary with a friend. If I didn't check in every 12 hours, they were to alert the authorities. It was a precaution I hoped I wouldn't need. The mouth of the cave was unremarkable, a dark gash in the mountainside partially hidden by scrub brush. As I stood at the entrance, adjusting my headlamp and double-checking my gear, a cool breeze whispered out of the darkness, carrying with it the musty scent of ages past. "Well, Javier," I muttered to myself, "no turning back now." I took a deep breath and plunged into the unknown. The first hour of exploration was uneventful. The passages were narrow but navigable, twisting and turning like the innards of some great stone beast. My headlamp cut through the gloom, revealing limestone formations that had never known the touch of sunlight. It was when I reached a large chamber that things began to change. My light swept across the cavern, revealing a sight that made me catch my breath. The walls were covered in what looked like claw marks, deep gouges in the solid rock that no normal animal could have made. "What the hell?" I whispered, my voice sounding small in the vast space. I approached the nearest wall, running my gloved hand over the marks. They were old, the edges worn smooth by time, but unmistakable. Whatever had made them was huge and powerful enough to carve into stone as if it were clay. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cave's cool air. I'd seen claw marks before, bear, big cats, but nothing like this. These were on a whole different scale. As I examined the marks more closely, my light caught something else. Scattered across the chamber floor were bones. Lots of bones. My heart rate quickened as I crouched down to examine them. Most were clearly animal, deer, boar, maybe some sheep. But mixed in among them, unmistakable in their shape, were human bones. Dios mío, I breathed, picking up what was unmistakably a human femur. It was cracked and splintered, as if something had been trying to get at the marrow inside. My mind raced. Could this be evidence of some prehistoric predator? A remnant of the Ice Age that had somehow survived in this isolated cave system? Or was there a more mundane, if equally terrifying explanation? A killer using the caves to dispose of victims? I needed to document this. I pulled out my camera, grateful for its waterproof casing, and began snapping photos of the claw marks and bones. The flash illuminated the chamber in brief, stark bursts, revealing more details with each picture. That's when I heard it. a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. I froze, my finger hovering over the camera's shutter button. Had I imagined it? I held my breath, straining my ears. There it was again, louder this time, and it was coming from deeper in the cave. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, to get out of this place and never look back. But the explorer in me, the part that had driven me to seek out this cave in the first place, urged me forward. I had to know what was making that sound. "You're an idiot, Javier," I muttered to myself as I gathered my gear and headed towards the source of the growl. The passage leading out of the chamber was narrow, forcing me to turn sideways at points to squeeze through. The claw marks continued, getting fresher as I progressed. Whatever had made them had passed this way recently. The growl came again, closer now. It reverberated through the stone, making my teeth rattle. Mixed with it was another sound, a wet crunching noise that turned my stomach. I emerged into another chamber, smaller than the last, but with a high, domed ceiling. My headlamp swept the area, and I had to stifle a gasp at what I saw. In the center of the chamber was a massive pile of bones, far larger than the scatter I'd seen before. And crouched atop it, illuminated in the beam of my light, was something. It was huge, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, even in its crouched position. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur, and its limbs ended in massive claws that matched the marks I'd seen. But it was the creature's face that froze the blood in my veins. It was a nightmarish blend of bear and ape, with a protruding snout full of razor-sharp teeth and small, gleaming eyes that reflected my light like a cat's. Those eyes locked onto mine, filled with a primal intelligence that was terrifyingly human. For a moment, neither of us moved. We stared at each other, predator and prey, separated by millions of years of evolution, yet sharing this primordial space. Then the creature roared. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, a primal challenge that shook dust and small rocks from the ceiling. I stumbled backward, my survival instinct finally overriding my curiosity. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my ears. Behind me, I could hear the creature giving chase, its massive form squeezing through passages that had barely accommodated me. I ran blindly, no longer caring about mapping my route or preserving my equipment. All that mattered was escape. My lungs burned, and my legs screamed with exertion, but terror kept me moving. I could hear the creature getting closer, its hot breath practically on my neck. In desperation, I squeezed through a narrow fissure, feeling the rough stones scrape against my back as I forced my way through. There was a roar of frustration behind me as the creature found itself unable to follow. I didn't stop to celebrate the small victory, pushing onwards through the twisting passages. My flashlight began to flicker, its beam growing weaker. "No, no, no," I gasped, fumbling for my backup light. But my hands were shaking too badly to manage it. Just as the light gave out completely, plunging me into absolute darkness, I saw something ahead, a faint glimmer that could only be daylight. With renewed energy, I pushed towards it. The passage began to slope upward, and I could feel a fresh breeze on my face. I was almost there. I burst out of the cave entrance, blinking in the sudden sunlight. Without pausing, I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, before finally managing to unlock it and throw myself inside. As I sped away from the mountain, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I couldn't shake the image of those eyes staring at me from the darkness. What was that creature? How long had it been down there, hidden from the world? I never went back to those caves. I submitted an anonymous tip to the local authorities about the human remains I'd found, but as far as I know, no thorough investigation was ever conducted. Maybe they didn't believe the report. Maybe they knew more than they let on and wanted to keep it quiet. As for me, I gave up caving after that. Some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed again. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, but on quiet nights, when the wind whistles just right, I can still hear that roar echoing in my dreams, a reminder that the world is far stranger and more terrifying than we dare to imagine. Story 10. The mist rolled in fast, too fast, swallowing everything around me in a thick, heavy blanket. 1 minute, the mountains stretched out before me, every tree and rock sharp against the early evening sky. The next, I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me, and somewhere hidden in that mist, I heard a low, guttural sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the wind. I shouldn't have pushed it. I knew better than to keep going when the weather turned, but I thought I had more time. The trail was familiar, and I figured I'd be back to camp before dark. I was wrong. Now the fog was closing in thick and fast, rolling over the ridge like some kind of living thing, wrapping around the trees, distorting everything. My skin prickled, that primal instinct kicking in, the one that tells you to turn back, to run, to not ignore the warning signs. But I was miles from camp, and stopping out here in the open wasn't an option. I kept moving, every step feeling heavier than the last, the mist dampening the air and every sound with it. The crunch of gravel under my boots sounded muted, almost swallowed by the mist. I adjusted my pack, feeling the weight dig into my shoulders, and kept my eyes forward, squinting to make out the trail ahead. But it was no use. Everything looked the same in this thick white haze, just shadows and shapes where the trees should be, disappearing as fast as they appeared. Then came that sound again. Low. A rumble, like something breathing, just outside the reach of my sight. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I listened hard, straining against the oppressive silence. For a second there was nothing but the damp stillness of the fog. Then, there it was again. Closer, a deep, throaty growl vibrating through the mist. My pulse jumped. That wasn't normal. That wasn't any kind of animal I recognized. Keep moving, I told myself, gripping the straps of my pack tighter. It's nothing. Probably just the wind playing tricks. But my gut said otherwise. I quickened my pace, boots scuffing on the rocky trail, trying to shake off the creeping feeling that I wasn't alone. The mist made it worse. The way it clung to everything, warping the landscape, making every shadow look like something more. I tried to focus, picking out familiar landmarks, but the fog was too thick now. It was like walking through a dream, where nothing made sense and everything blurred together. I checked my watch. Almost 7 p.m. I was running out of daylight, and soon the temperature would start dropping fast. I needed to find shelter, a place to wait out the mist, somewhere with better visibility, because staying on the trail like this was a mistake. I'd be easy to track, easy to follow. I didn't know why that thought hit me so hard, but it stuck. The growl came again. This time, much closer, my heart pounded in my chest as I whipped around, flashlight up, scanning the fog. I swept the beam in wide arcs, the light cutting through the mist like a knife, but revealing nothing. Only that damn fog. I sucked in a breath and kept walking, faster now. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, like I could feel something just behind me, watching. I didn't dare turn again. That would just confirm it. 10 minutes passed, maybe 15. The fog was showing no signs of lifting, and I could feel the cold settling into my bones. I needed to find some cover, fast. Ahead, I spotted what looked like a rocky outcrop, just visible through the mist, the jagged silhouette barely distinguishable from the rest of the landscape. I pushed toward it, my legs burning from the uphill climb. The rocks offered a small overhang, not much, but enough to keep me out of the mist and buy me some time to figure out my next move. I crouched down under it, resting my back against the cold stone, and listened. The wind had died completely. The only sound was my own breathing, loud in the stillness. I pulled out my water bottle, took a long swig, and wiped the sweat from my brow. My head was pounding now, a dull throb at my temples. Stress, probably. Then, there it was again. That growl. Deep, menacing, not far off. My body tensed. It wasn't my imagination. Something was out there, and it was getting closer. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the area again, sweeping the beam in every direction. The fog shifted with the light, making everything feel off, like the landscape itself was changing. My pulse quickened. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. That gut instinct I'd learned to trust after years of hiking. Something was out there, and it wasn't friendly. I fumbled for my radio, hands shaking, and pressed the button. "Base camp, this is Noah. Do you copy?" My voice sounded strained even to me. Static. "Base camp, it's Noah. Can anyone hear me?" More static, then a faint crackle, but nothing else. No response. Shit! I shoved the radio back in my pack and stood, the fog pressing in even closer now. I couldn't just sit here. Whatever was out there wasn't going to wait around for me to figure out my next move. I adjusted my pack, heart racing, and started down the trail again, keeping to the edge of the trees, hoping the cover might give me an advantage. Every muscle in my body was tight, adrenaline pumping through me as I moved fast, my breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. I needed to get out of this mist. I needed to... A loud snap echoed through the trees, like a branch breaking under something heavy. I froze, flashlight whipping toward the sound, but all I could see was white, thick, suffocating fog. Then came the growl again. So close now, I could feel the vibrations in my chest. I started running. My boots pounded the trail, legs burning, breath ragged. The fog wrapped around me, making every step feel like I was moving in slow motion, like the air itself was trying to hold me back. The growl followed, growing louder, closer with every second. Whatever it was fast. Too fast. I could hear it now, heavy footfalls crashing through the underbrush behind me. My chest tightened with panic. I wasn't going to outrun this thing. I needed a plan, a place to hide, something. Up ahead, I spotted a fallen tree, its massive trunk splitting the trail in two. Without thinking, I veered off the path, diving behind it, my body hitting the ground hard. I lay there, pressed against the damp earth, my breath shallow, my heart slamming against my ribs. The growling had stopped, but I knew it was out there, somewhere. I gripped my flashlight tight, my mind racing. What the hell was I up against? A bear? No, bears don't follow you like that. A mountain lion, maybe? But even then, something didn't add up. The woods went quiet again, too quiet. I strained to listen, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting for the next sound. Seconds passed, then a minute. Nothing. Had it left? Was it still out there, waiting for me to make a move? My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out everything else. I needed to get out of here. I started to crawl, keeping low, moving slowly around the fallen tree. My body ached with tension, every nerve on high alert. I glanced over the trunk, scanning the mist, but saw nothing, no movement, no sign of whatever had been chasing me. I started to stand, inching forward, when something heavy slammed into the tree behind me, shaking the ground with the impact. I stumbled back, heart leaping into my throat as I turned. For a split second, I saw it. A massive, hulking shape, shrouded in the fog, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Too big to be a person, too fast to be anything I recognized. I didn't wait to get a better look. I ran, harder, faster than I ever had before, my legs screaming in protest, my lungs burning. The fog blurred around me, but I didn't care. All I knew was that I had to get away. The growl came again, so close it felt like it was right behind me. I didn't look back. I kept running, the trail a blur of rocks and roots and mist, until I burst through the tree line, stumbling into an open clearing. The fog was thinner here, the last rays of sunlight breaking through. I could see the road just ahead, the faint outline of my truck parked where I'd left it hours ago. I didn't stop until I reached it, throwing myself into the driver's seat and slamming the door shut. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, my breath coming in gasps. The engine roared to life and I peeled out of there, the tires kicking up dirt as I sped down the road, away from the mist, away from whatever was hiding in it. I didn't stop driving until the mountains were far behind me, and even then, the growl echoed in my mind. It wasn't until I was halfway home that I realized I'd dropped my camera somewhere on the trail. I didn't go back for it. Story 11. The claw marks on the tree were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Too high for a bear, too deep for a mountain lion. My scientific mind raced with possibilities, each more improbable than the last. But one thought kept pushing its way to the forefront. What if the locals were right? I'm Yuki Tanaka, biology graduate student at the University of Washington. I came to these remote woods to study the impact of climate change on local fauna. Instead, I might have stumbled onto the discovery of the century. Or I might be losing my mind. It started 3 days ago. I'd set up my research station in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines and the constant whisper of wind through leaves. The first 2 days were uneventful, cataloging plant species, setting up trail cameras, the usual routine. Then, on the third morning, I found the claw marks, 5 parallel gouges in the bark of an old growth pine, at least 9 feet off the ground. My first thought was bear, but the spacing was all wrong, and bears don't typically climb that high unless they're marking territory. I snapped some photos, took measurements, and tried to push away the growing unease in my gut. There had to be a logical explanation. Later that day, I found the first tuft of fur caught on a low-hanging branch. Dark, coarse, and unlike any animal native to the area. I bagged it carefully, already anticipating the DNA analysis back at the lab. That night, hunched over my laptop in the soft glow of my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet, the usual chorus of nocturnal creatures conspicuously absent. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness. I froze, breath catching in my throat. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. If there was something out there, I'd just given away my position. Silence answered me, then a low, rumbling sound that sent chills down my spine. Not quite a growl, not quite anything I'd ever heard before. I fumbled for my flashlight, heart pounding. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but shadows and mist. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The next morning, I hiked out to check my trail cameras. The unease from the night before had faded in the light of day, replaced by scientific curiosity. Whatever had made those marks, whatever had left that fur, I was determined to document it. The first 2 cameras showed nothing unusual: deer, raccoons, the occasional coyote. But the third... My hands shook as I reviewed the footage. There, in the grainy infrared image, was a figure. Massive, at least 8 feet tall, moving with a fluid grace that belied its size. It passed in front of the camera for only a second, but it was enough to turn my world upside down. "This can't be real," I muttered, rewinding the footage. But there it was again. Unmistakable. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, going through the motions of my research while my mind raced. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave, to pretend I'd never seen what I'd seen. But the scientist in me, the part that had driven me into these woods in the first place, wouldn't let it go. As night fell, I found myself setting up a new camera near my tent. If that thing came back, I was going to get a clear shot of it. Hours passed. I dozed fitfully, jolting awake at every sound. The forest seemed to press in around me, alive with possibilities both wondrous and terrifying. It was just past midnight when I heard it. Heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling my campsite. My heart hammered in my chest as I reached for the camera, hands trembling. Unzipping the tent as quietly as I could, I poked my head out. The full moon cast long shadows across the clearing, turning familiar shapes into looming monsters. But there, at the edge of the trees, was a shadow darker than the rest, moving, watching. I raised the camera with shaking hands, praying the flash wouldn't scare it off, or provoke it. The shutter clicked. For a split second the clearing was illuminated in harsh white light. And there it was, massive, covered in dark, matted fur, standing upright on 2 legs, but with a stoop that spoke of a lifetime moving on all 4s. Its face was a nightmare blend of ape and man, with deep-set eyes that reflected the camera flash like twin moons. Time seemed to stop as we stared at each other. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was frozen in place. Then, slowly, the creature raised one enormous hand, not in threat, but almost like a greeting. "Hello," I whispered, hardly believing what I was seeing. The creature's head tilted, regarding me with an intelligence that sent shivers down my spine. Then it spoke. The sound was low and rumbling, more felt than heard, but unmistakably language. "Why, here." I blinked, sure I must be hallucinating, but the creature was still there, waiting for an answer. "I'm studying," I managed to stammer out. "The forest, the animals." The creature's eyes narrowed. "Not animal," it growled. "No," I agreed, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. "No, you're definitely not." For a long moment we just stared at each other. I had 1,000 questions burning on my tongue, but I was afraid to break the fragile moment. Finally, the creature spoke again. "Dangerous," it rumbled. "You go." "Wait," I called out as it turned to leave. "What are you? Where did you come from?" The creature paused, looking back over its massive shoulder. "Always here," it said simply. "You not see." And then it was gone, melting into the shadows with impossible silence for something so large. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to follow, to demand answers, but a deeper instinct told me that would be a terrible idea. Instead, I retreated to my tent, clutching the camera like a lifeline. Sleep was out of the question. I spent the rest of the night reviewing the footage, half convinced I'd imagined the whole encounter. But there it was, in crisp, digital clarity. Proof of something that shouldn't exist. As dawn broke, I faced a decision. I had evidence that would rock the scientific community to its core. Proof of a species that had managed to exist alongside us for centuries, always hidden, always watching. But as I packed up my gear, a nagging doubt began to grow. What would happen if I shared this? Scientists, media, government agencies, they would descend on these woods like locusts. This creature, whatever it was, would be hunted, studied, probably destroyed. Was that really the right thing to do? I thought about the intelligence in those eyes, the complexity of language. This wasn't just some undiscovered animal. It was something more, something that had clearly gone to great lengths to avoid human contact. Did I have the right to expose it? The drive back to civilization was a blur of conflicting emotions. By the time I reached my small apartment, I had made my decision. I uploaded the photos and video to my secure cloud storage, then erased them from the camera. The fur sample went into my personal freezer, labeled as bear hair. In my official report, I documented climate impacts on known species. Nothing more. Some might call it a betrayal of scientific principles, but as I sat at my desk, staring at the encrypted files that could change the world, I knew I had made the right choice. There were still mysteries out there, things beyond our understanding, and maybe, just maybe, they deserved to stay that way. I would go back to those woods someday, not with cameras and specimen jars, but with an open mind and a willingness to learn. Because if there was one thing my encounter had taught me, it was that we humans don't have all the answers. And sometimes, that's okay. Story 12. The forest had always been my sanctuary, a place of peace and solitude. But as I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the impossibly tall figure moving silently between the trees, I realized that sanctuary had become a trap. My name is Elena Kovac, and I'm an avid hiker with years of experience traversing the wilderness of Eastern Europe. The Carpathian Mountains had been my playground for as long as I could remember. I knew their trails, their moods, their secrets, or so I thought. That crisp autumn morning started like any other solo hike. I'd set out at dawn, my backpack loaded with supplies for a day-long trek through a lesser-known area of the mountains. The air was cool and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and decaying leaves. Mist clung to the valleys below, giving the landscape an ethereal quality. As I climbed higher, the forest grew denser, the trees older and more gnarled. Shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. It was beautiful, peaceful, the kind of scene I'd captured countless times on my camera. But something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was a tension in the air, a stillness that seemed unnatural. The usual chorus of birdsong was muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I paused to consult my map, double-checking my route. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. I turned, expecting to see a deer or perhaps a bear in the distance. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. It was humanoid in shape, but far too tall, at least 8 feet, maybe more. Its body was covered in dark, matted fur, and its limbs were long and unnaturally thin. It moved with an eerie grace, gliding between the trees as if it was part of the forest itself. I blinked hard, certain I must be seeing things, but when I opened my eyes, it was still there, closer now, and it was looking directly at me. Its face, if you could call it that, was a nightmarish blend of human and animal features. Deep-set eyes gleamed with an intelligence that was decidedly not animal, set in a face that was too long, too angular to be human. I stood frozen, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs refusing to move. The creature tilted its head, regarding me with what seemed like curiosity. Then, slowly, deliberately, it raised one long-fingered hand and beckoned to me. That broke the spell. I turned and ran, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know what that thing was, but every fiber of my being told me I needed to get away from it. I crashed through the underbrush, no longer caring about following the trail. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I kept going. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I paused, gasping for breath, and leaned against a tree. The forest was silent. Had I lost it? Slowly, I turned in a circle, scanning the trees. Nothing, just the usual forest scenery. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "Get it together, Elena," I muttered to myself. "There's no such thing as monsters." But even as I said it, I knew I was lying to myself. What I'd seen was real, impossible as it seemed, and I had a sinking feeling that I wasn't out of danger yet. I pulled out my phone, hoping against hope that I'd somehow have signal up here. No such luck. I was on my own. Taking a deep breath, I tried to orient myself. In my panic, I'd run off the trail and into a part of the forest I didn't recognize. The sun was higher now, making it harder to determine direction. I dug my compass out of my pack, relieved to have at least one reliable tool. As I was figuring out which way to go, I heard it. A soft rustling, too deliberate to be the wind. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. There it was again, that impossible figure, standing between 2 ancient oaks. It was closer this time, close enough that I could see the way its chest rose and fell with each breath. Close enough to see that its eyes were a deep, unnatural green. This time, it didn't beckon. Instead, it simply turned and began to walk away, its movements fluid and silent. And to my horror, I felt an overwhelming urge to follow it. "No," I said aloud, my voice sounding small and scared in the vast silence of the forest. "No, I'm not going with you." The creature paused, looking back over its shoulder. Its eyes met mine, and I felt a pressure in my head, like the beginnings of a migraine. An image flashed in my mind, a cave, hidden behind a waterfall. Somehow I knew that's where it wanted to take me. I shook my head, trying to clear it. This was insane. I needed to get out of here, to get back to civilization. But as I turned to leave, I realized with growing dread that I had no idea which way to go. The forest looked the same in every direction, the trees pressing in close, their branches intertwining overhead to block out the sky. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, but the creature was gone. Yet I could feel its presence, moving around me, always just out of sight. It was herding me, I realized with a chill, guiding me away from the trail, deeper into its domain. "What do you want?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Why are you doing this?" No answer came, just another soft rustle of movement, always moving away from where I wanted to go. I was being led, step by step, in the direction it wanted me to go. Hours passed like this, the sun moving overhead, though I could barely see it through the thick canopy. My water was running low, and exhaustion was setting in. But still, the creature kept me moving, appearing just often enough to keep me on the path it had chosen. As twilight began to fall, I heard the sound of rushing water. The trees thinned, and I found myself on the edge of a small clearing. A waterfall cascaded down a rocky cliff face, the same one I'd seen in that strange vision. The creature stood there, at the base of the waterfall, watching me. It made no move to approach, but I could feel its anticipation, its expectation that I would come to it. "No," I said, summoning what little courage I had left. "I'm not going in there. Whatever you are, whatever you want, I'm not playing this game anymore." I turned to leave, determined to find my way back, even if it meant wandering in the dark. But as I took a step, a searing pain shot through my head. I cried out, falling to my knees. Through watering eyes, I saw the creature approaching, its movements no longer fluid, but jagged, angry. In that moment, I made a choice. With the last of my strength, I pulled the emergency flare from my pack and fired it into the sky. The forest lit up in a harsh red glow, and a boom echoed off the mountains. The creature recoiled, letting out a sound that was part shriek, part roar. It backed away, those unnatural green eyes fixed on me with what I could only describe as fury. Then, in a blink, it was gone, melting into the shadows of the forest. I collapsed, the pain in my head subsiding to a dull throb. I don't know how long I lay there, but eventually I heard the most beautiful sound, human voices calling my name. The search and rescue team found me there, dehydrated and exhausted. I babbled about the creature, about being led through the forest, but they chalked it up to delirium from my ordeal. Even I began to doubt my memories as the days passed. But sometimes, when I look out at the mountains from my window, I swear I can see a tall, thin figure moving between the distant trees. And on quiet nights, I dream of green eyes and hidden caves, and wonder what might have been waiting for me behind that waterfall. I still hike, still love the mountains, but I never go alone anymore, and I always stay on the trail. Story 13. The cold had a way of getting under your skin up here, like it knew just how to find those little gaps in your clothing, creeping in without you noticing. By the time you did notice, it was too late. You were shivering, the kind that starts deep in your bones and doesn't let go. That's how it felt when I crawled out of the tent that morning. But the real chill didn't come from the cold. It came from the footprints, massive, deep, and circling our campsite like some kind of silent warning. I didn't see them right away, not with the way the snow had drifted during the night, but Ethan did. "Maya," he called, voice tight, "come look at this." I was still fumbling with my gloves, trying to fight the sharp morning air that bit at my fingers. "What is it?" "Just come here." There was something in his voice that made me stop what I was doing, something that wasn't right. I zipped up my jacket and stepped over to where he was crouched by the edge of our tent. "Look." I followed his gaze down to the snow and felt my stomach twist. Footprints, huge ones, much bigger than any animal we'd seen up here before. They were spaced too far apart for a person, too deep for anything that should be wandering around this mountain. My breath clouded the air as I crouched down next to him, my gloved hand brushing over the edge of one of the prints. "Do you think it's a bear?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Ethan shook his head. No way. Bears don't walk like that, and besides, bears are hibernating this time of year. He stood up, running a hand through his hair, eyes scanning the woods around us. Whatever it was, it came through last night, while we were sleeping. That realization hit hard. I looked back at the tent, our small, flimsy shelter from the night. We'd been out here for days, on this winter backpacking trip we'd planned for months. No cell service, no roads for miles, just us, the snow, and now, whatever had left these prints. The tracks circled our campsite in a wide arc, almost like something had been watching, waiting. My stomach flipped again. We need to pack up and head back, I said, standing quickly, my breath coming faster now. We're too far out to... Wait. Ethan held up a hand, eyes still locked on the tree line. Look. I followed his gaze and saw it. The tracks didn't just circle us. They led off into the woods, disappearing into the thick, snow-laden pines. I swallowed hard. We need to leave. Ethan shook his head, crouching down to inspect the tracks again. Hold on. This could be something. Something big. No one's ever seen anything like this out here. We need to follow it. Are you serious? My voice came out sharper than I intended. Ethan, we don't even know what it is. For all we know, it's dangerous. Exactly. He stood, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. Which is why we have to figure it out. Besides, we've got our gear, and it's daylight. Whatever it is, it's probably long gone by now. I stared at him, heart pounding in my chest. I knew Ethan well enough to understand there was no talking him out of this once his mind was set. He lived for this kind of thing, exploring the unknown, pushing boundaries. But this was different. I don't like this, I muttered, grabbing my pack and strapping it on, my fingers stiff with cold. I don't like this at all. Just a quick look, Ethan said, already moving toward the edge of the clearing. We follow the tracks for a bit. If we don't see anything, we turn back. I sighed, pulling my hat down tighter over my ears, and fell in step behind him. The snow crunched under our boots as we followed the trail, my breath coming in visible puffs in the cold air. The forest around us was silent. Too silent. No birds, no wind, nothing but the sound of our footsteps and the occasional rustle of a branch weighed down by snow. The tracks continued, long and deliberate, leading deeper into the woods. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. What kind of animal could leave tracks like these, and why had it circled our camp? Do you think we should have woken up when it was here? I asked quietly, my voice feeling too loud in the stillness. Ethan shrugged, his eyes focused on the ground ahead. I don't know. Maybe. Depends how quiet it was. He glanced back at me with a faint smile. Don't worry, we're fine. If it wanted to mess with us, it had all night. I didn't find that as reassuring as he probably intended, but I forced a smile back. We walked for what felt like an hour, the tracks leading us farther and farther from camp. Every now and then, Ethan would crouch down, muttering to himself, trying to make sense of the size and depth of the prints, while I stood guard, scanning the trees for any movement. But the deeper we went, the more unsettled I became. The silence felt wrong, almost oppressive. And then, the tracks stopped. What the hell? Ethan crouched down again, studying the snow. The tracks just ended, right in the middle of the forest. No sign of a struggle, no broken branches, no tracks leading away. They were just gone. How does that even happen? I asked, my voice tight with disbelief. There's nothing here. It didn't fly away, Ethan. He stood slowly, eyes narrowing as he looked around. I don't know. Maybe it climbed a tree? I stared at him, my heart starting to race again. No way. You saw the size of those tracks. Whatever made them isn't climbing anything. He didn't respond, just kept looking around, like the answer was hiding somewhere in the snow if he stared hard enough. My skin prickled again, that creeping sensation of being watched sliding over me like a cold wind. I turned slowly, scanning the trees, my breath catching in my throat. Something moved. I froze, heart slamming against my chest. Ethan! What? I saw something. He looked up sharply. Where? I pointed toward the trees where I'd caught the movement. It had been fast, just a flicker in the corner of my eye, but it was enough to send every alarm in my body into overdrive. Ethan stepped closer, squinting into the shadows. You sure? I nodded, my pulse roaring in my ears. Something's out there. For the first time since we started following the tracks, I saw doubt flicker across his face. He glanced at the trees, then back at the tracks, which still ended abruptly a few feet away. Let's head back, he said, his voice low, almost too calm. We'll figure this out later. I didn't argue. We turned and started walking quickly back the way we came, but the sense of something following us was stronger now, pressing in on me like a physical weight. I could feel eyes on us, watching, waiting. The snow beneath our boots seemed louder than before, the crunching sound echoing in the unnatural silence of the woods. My legs burned as we picked up the pace, but I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to see what was behind us. Then I heard it, a low, rumbling growl that sent a jolt of terror through me. I froze, grabbing Ethan's arm. Did you hear that? He nodded, his face pale. Yeah, I heard it. We stood there, not daring to move, listening. The growl came again, closer this time, vibrating through the air, deep and menacing. Whatever it was big, and it was angry. Run, Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. We took off, sprinting through the snow, our breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The growling grew louder, closer, and I could hear something crashing through the trees behind us, moving faster than anything I'd ever heard. My lungs burned, my legs screaming in protest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Ethan was just ahead of me, his face set in grim determination, his eyes focused on the trail. I could feel the weight of whatever was behind us, closing in, its growls shaking the air around us. My mind raced, panic clawing at the edges of my thoughts. We burst into the clearing where our tent still stood, untouched, as if nothing had happened. I didn't stop until I reached it, collapsing to my knees, gasping for breath. Ethan was right beside me, his chest heaving, eyes wide with fear. For a long moment neither of us spoke, the only sound our ragged breathing and the distant rustle of the trees. Then, slowly, the growling stopped. The woods went silent again. I looked at Ethan, my hands still shaking. What the hell was that? He shook his head, eyes locked on the tree line. I don't know. But whatever it was, I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't gone. Not really. It was just waiting. Story 14. The first sheep's throat was torn out clean, like something had reached right in and yanked. The second was worse. By the third, I was fighting the urge to vomit. Whatever had done this wasn't like any predator I'd ever seen before, and judging by the tracks leading away from the carnage, it was still out there. My name's Omar Hassan, and I've been tending sheep in these hills for 20 years. I thought I knew every threat my flock faced. Wolves, bears, the occasional mountain lion. But what I found that morning shook me to my core and made me question everything I thought I knew about the wild. It started like any other day. I woke before dawn, the cool mountain air seeping through the cracks in my small cabin. The familiar bleating of the sheep greeted me as I stepped outside, coffee mug in hand. But something was off. The flock seemed agitated, huddled together near the center of the pasture instead of spread out grazing. Easy now, I murmured, approaching slowly. What's got you all riled up? That's when I saw the blood. Dark patches staining the dewy grass, leading towards the tree line. My heart sank as I followed the trail, already knowing what I'd find. The first carcass lay just inside the woods, what was left of it anyway. The sheep had been torn apart, its white wool matted with blood, and something else, a dark, viscous fluid I couldn't identify. I crouched down, examining the wounds. They were savage, far worse than anything I'd seen from the local predators. And the smell, a rank, musky odor that made my eyes water. "What the hell did this?" I muttered, more to myself than anything. As if in answer, a low growl echoed through the trees. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Slowly, I turned towards the sound. Two eyes glowed in the shadows, reflecting the early morning light. They were huge, set high off the ground. Whatever I was looking at, it was big. Too big. I backed away slowly, heart hammering in my chest. The eyes followed my movement, a low rumble emanating from the darkness. "Easy there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "No need for trouble." The growl deepened, and I caught a glimpse of movement. Something massive shifted in the underbrush, just out of sight. I turned and ran. Back at the cabin, I grabbed my rifle and called the local ranger station. My hands shook as I dialed, eyes constantly darting to the tree line. "Ranger station, this is Mike. What's your emergency?" "Mike, it's Omar Hassan, up on Black Ridge. I've got... Christ, I don't even know how to describe it. Something's killed 3 of my sheep, tore them apart." "Slow down, Omar. What kind of predator are we talking about? Bear? Mountain lion?" I hesitated. How could I explain what I'd seen without sounding crazy? "I don't know," I said finally. "It's big, bigger than any bear I've ever seen, and the way it killed, it's not natural, Mike." There was a pause on the other end. "All right, Omar, sit tight. I'll send someone out to take a look. In the meantime, keep your rifle handy and stay inside if you can." I thanked him and hung up, feeling only slightly reassured. Whatever was out there, I doubted a park ranger was equipped to handle it. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. I kept watch from the cabin window, rifle across my lap. The sheep huddled near the house, too terrified to graze. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had me on edge. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I heard a vehicle approaching. Relief washed over me as I recognized the ranger's truck. I met Mike at the door, grateful for another human presence. He was a big man, solid and reassuring in his green uniform. "Evening, Omar," he said, nodding as he climbed out of the truck. "Let's take a look at what we're dealing with." I led him to the kill site, describing what I'd seen that morning. Mike listened silently, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "And you say you actually saw the creature?" he asked as we reached the edge of the woods. I nodded. "Just its eyes. But they were huge, Mike, set high up. Whatever this thing is, it's not like anything I've seen before." Mike crouched down, examining the torn earth and scattered wool. His hand went to his hip, unclasping the strap on his holster. "I've been a ranger for 15 years, he said quietly, "seen all kinds of predator kills. But this," he shook his head, "this is something else." A twig snapped deeper in the forest. We both froze, eyes straining in the fading light. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Mike nodded, slowly rising to his feet. "Let's head back to the cabin. I'm going to call this in, get some more people out here." We turned to leave, and that's when we heard it. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't the sound of any animal I knew. It was almost human. "Run!" Mike said, his voice tight with fear. We sprinted back towards the cabin, the sound of heavy footfalls crashing through the underbrush behind us. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. A massive shape burst from the tree line, silhouetted against the darkening sky. It was easily 8 feet tall, running on 2 legs, but hunched over like some nightmarish fusion of man and beast. "What the fuck is that?" Mike yelled, fumbling for his sidearm. We reached the cabin just as the creature let out a bone-chilling howl. I slammed the door behind us, hands shaking as I threw the bolt. "The windows," I gasped. "We need to board them up." Mike was already moving, dragging a heavy bookshelf in front of the nearest window. "Omar, call for backup, now!" I grabbed the phone, but the line was dead. Of course it was. Why would anything go right on this nightmare of a day? Outside, something heavy slammed against the side of the cabin. The whole structure shook, dust raining down from the rafters. "It's trying to get in," I said, stating the obvious. Mike nodded grimly, checking his pistol. "We need to hold out until morning. These things, they don't like the daylight." I turned to him, a chill running down my spine. "These things? You mean you've seen this before?" He hesitated, then nodded. "There have been reports, sightings, but nothing this brazen. They usually stick to the deep forest, avoid humans." Another impact rocked the cabin. A window shattered, and a massive clawed hand reached through the gap. Mike fired, the gunshot deafening in the small space. The hand withdrew with a roar of pain and fury. "That won't stop it for long," he said, ejecting the spent casing. "We need a plan." I nodded, trying to think through the panic clouding my mind. "The basement. There's an old storm cellar, steel door. If we can make it down there—" Mike considered for a moment, then nodded. "All right, on 3, we make a run for it. Ready?" I gripped my rifle tighter, heart pounding. "Ready. 1, 2, 3. We bolted for the trapdoor, the sound of splintering wood behind us. I yanked it open, practically falling down the stairs in my haste. Mike slammed the door just as a massive shape filled the doorway above. Claws scrabbled against steel as we huddled in the darkness, hardly daring to breathe. For hours we listened to the creature's fury. It howled and raged, tearing the cabin apart in its efforts to reach us. But the cellar door held. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the cracks, the sounds finally ceased. We waited another hour before daring to emerge. The cabin was in ruins, claw marks scoring every surface. But we were alive. In the harsh light of day, it was tempting to believe it had all been some shared delusion. But the destruction around us and the massive inhuman footprints in the mud told a different story. "What do we do now?" I asked, surveying the wreckage of my life. Mike sighed, holstering his weapon. "We tell the truth, or at least as much of it as people will believe, and we prepare. Because if these things are getting bold enough to attack homesteads—" He didn't need to finish the thought. Whatever was out there, whatever had nearly killed us, it wasn't going away. The wild was pushing back, reclaiming territory with teeth and claw. And we humans? We were no longer at the top of the food chain. As I stood there, watching the sun rise over the mountains I'd called home for so long, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The world had changed overnight, revealing monsters I never knew existed. All I could do now was adapt, and hope that when night fell again, I'd be ready. Story 15. The camera's red light blinked steadily in the darkness, a silent sentinel in the depths of the forest. But as I reviewed the footage, my blood ran cold. There, staring directly into the lens with unsettling intelligence, was a creature that shouldn't exist. My name is Ravi Patel, and I'm a wildlife biologist specializing in the study of large predators. For the past 5 years, I've been conducting research in the remote wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, tracking wolf packs and studying their impact on the ecosystem. It's solitary work, but I've always found peace in the quiet majesty of the forest. Until now. It started as a routine check of my trail cameras. I'd set up a network of them throughout my study area, capturing images and video of wildlife activity. Most days, it was nothing more exciting than deer grazing or the occasional black bear ambling by. But that day was different. I'd hiked out to my most remote camera location, a small clearing deep in the old-growth forest. The morning mist still clung to the towering cedars and Douglas firs, giving the woods an ethereal quality. The only sounds were the soft crunch of pine needles under my boots and the distant call of a Steller's jay. As I approached the camera, I noticed something odd. The sturdy metal case I'd used to protect it from curious animals had been bent and twisted, as if something incredibly strong had tried to pry it open. "What the hell?" I muttered, crouching down to examine the damage. Claw marks scored the metal, deeper and larger than any bear I'd ever encountered could make. With growing unease, I removed the memory card and slotted it into my tablet. The footage began normally enough, the usual parade of deer, raccoons, and the occasional cougar. But then, at around 2 a.m., something large moved into frame. At first, I thought it was a bear standing on its hind legs. But as I watched, my scientific mind struggling to process what I was seeing, I realized this was something else entirely. The creature was bipedal, covered in thick, dark fur. It moved with an unsettling blend of grace and power, its long arms swinging as it walked, but it was the face that made my breath catch in my throat. It was almost human, with deep-set eyes that gleamed with intelligence. Those eyes locked onto the camera, and the creature's head tilted in what could only be described as curiosity. It approached, its massive form filling the frame. Then, with deliberate care, it reached out towards the lens. The video cut out abruptly. I sat back, my mind reeling. What had I just seen? It couldn't be what it looked like. Bigfoot, Sasquatch. These were myths, not real creatures. I'd spent my entire career in these woods and never seen anything like this. But the evidence was right there on my screen, and those eyes, they haunted me. There was something in them that went beyond animal intelligence, something that seemed almost human. I needed a second opinion. Fumbling with cold fingers, I pulled out my satellite phone and dialed my colleague, Dr. Sarah Chen. "Ravi?" Sarah's voice crackled over the line. "Is everything okay? You never called during fieldwork." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sarah, I need you to look at some footage. I've captured something. I can't explain it." There was a pause on the other end. "What do you mean? Another wolf pack?" "No," I said, glancing nervously at the surrounding trees. "Something bigger, much bigger. I think I may have footage of a Sasquatch." The silence that followed was deafening. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was careful, measured. "Ravi, are you sure you're feeling all right? Maybe you should come back to the research station." "I'm not hallucinating, Sarah," I snapped, frustration bubbling up. "I know what I saw. Just look at the footage, okay? I'm sending it now." I ended the call and attached the video file to an email, hitting send before I could second-guess myself. As I waited for a response, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest, which had always been a place of comfort for me, suddenly felt alien and threatening. A twig snapped somewhere behind me, and I whirled around, my heart pounding. The trees stood silent and still, revealing nothing, but I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes upon me. My phone buzzed, making me jump. It was Sarah. "I've seen the video," she said without preamble, her voice tense. "Ravi, I don't know what this is, but you need to get out of there, now." "But the research—" I started to protest. "Forget the research," Sarah cut me off. "We don't know what we're dealing with here. It could be dangerous. Pack up your gear and head back to base camp. I'm calling in a team to investigate." As much as I wanted to stay, to try and capture more evidence, I knew she was right. Whatever I'd recorded, it was beyond my expertise. And if it was still out there? I quickly gathered my equipment, constantly scanning the tree line. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. I'd never felt so exposed, so vulnerable in the wilderness before. Just as I shouldered my pack ready to leave, I heard it, a low, rumbling vocalization that was neither fully animal nor human. It raised the hair on the back of my neck and sent a chill down my spine. I ran. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, all thoughts of stealth forgotten. I could hear something moving parallel to me, just out of sight. It was keeping pace effortlessly, herding me deeper into the forest, away from the trail that led back to my camp. I burst into a small clearing, gasping for breath. The forest had gone eerily silent. No bird calls, no rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. Nothing but the sound of my own ragged breathing. Slowly, I turned in a circle, searching for any sign of my pursuer. That's when I saw it. It stood at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden by the shadows of the ancient trees. But I could see enough to know that this was the same creature from the video. It was even larger in person, towering at least 8 feet tall. Those intelligent eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a jolt of recognition. This wasn't just an animal. There was something more there, something that defied easy classification. We stood there, frozen in a tableau of impossible encounter. My scientific mind was screaming for me to document this, to pull out my camera and capture irrefutable evidence. But a more primal part of me knew that would be a mistake. This creature, whatever it was, didn't want to be discovered, and it was letting me go. Slowly, carefully, I began to back away. The creature made no move to follow, but its eyes never left me. As I reached the edge of the clearing, I heard that rumbling vocalization again. But this time, it sounded almost like words, unintelligible, but with a cadence that was unmistakably language. I turned and ran again, not stopping until I reached my camp. I packed up in record time and drove back to the research station in a daze. Sarah was waiting for me, her face etched with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked as I stumbled out of my truck. "What happened out there?" I opened my mouth to tell her everything, but the words wouldn't come. How could I describe what I'd seen, what I'd felt in that clearing? How could I explain the intelligence in those eyes, the almost language I'd heard? "I don't know," I finally said, my voice hoarse. "But I think we need to reevaluate everything we thought we knew about these forests." In the days that followed, a team was sent to investigate the area. They found no trace of the creature, no footprints, no hair samples. Nothing but my damaged camera and the video it had captured. The scientific community dismissed it as a hoax or a misidentified bear. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the lab late at night, I swear I can hear that rumbling almost language, calling me back to the depths of the forest, back to the mystery that waits in the shadows, just beyond the reach of our understanding. I don't know if I'll ever return to those woods, but I do know that my encounter has changed me forever. There are things in this world that science has yet to explain, creatures that defy our neat classifications. And somewhere out there, in the ancient forests of the Pacific Northwest, one of them is watching, waiting, perhaps even trying to communicate. The question is, are we ready to listen? Story 16. The forest never felt threatening to me. Sure, it had its dangers, but I'd spent years working these woods, knowing every trail, every sound, every shift in the wind. It was my job to keep it safe, to know it like the back of my hand. But that night, standing in a clearing with the cold air thick around me, I realized something had changed, something was wrong, and the forest felt different, like it wasn't mine anymore. It started with a report. They always do. A couple of hikers said they heard something strange in the dead of night, something that didn't sound like any animal they'd ever heard before. Now, hikers say that kind of thing all the time, so I didn't think much of it. But then the reports kept coming. A few more hikers, a guy from the town nearby, swearing he heard low, guttural growls echoing off the cliffs near the old river bend. I was working the evening shift when the latest call came in, crackling through the old two-way radio on my desk. "Ranger Lucas, you there?" I picked up the receiver, sighing. "Yeah, go ahead." "This is Frank over at the station. We got another report of strange noises out near the East Ridge. You mind taking a look? It's getting dark, but this one sounded, well, spooked." I leaned back in my chair, glancing at the clock. Sunset was closing in fast. "Spooked how?" There was a pause, then a soft chuckle on the other end. Said it wasn't an animal, didn't sound like any critter he's ever come across. Said it felt big. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of my head. Fine. I'll head out there now, probably just a bear passing through. Could be, Frank replied, but take it easy, all right? Keep your radio close. I grabbed my jacket, clipped the radio to my belt, and headed for the truck. The sun was already low in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest as I drove down the narrow dirt road toward the east ridge. The woods out there were dense, quiet. They had a way of swallowing sound, especially as the light faded. By the time I reached the trailhead, dusk had settled in. I parked the truck, slung my rifle over my shoulder, and started down the narrow path. The air was colder than usual, a sharp bite in the wind that made me pull my jacket tighter around me. The trail wound deeper into the forest, the trees closing in, their branches heavy with late autumn leaves that rustled faintly in the breeze. I scanned the ground as I walked, looking for tracks, signs of any animals that might have wandered through. Nothing yet, but I wasn't too concerned. Bears were common out here, especially this time of year. They were getting ready to hibernate, moving slower, keeping to themselves. But then, about a mile in, I heard it. A low, rumbling sound, like a growl but deeper, almost a vibration in the ground beneath me. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing as I listened. There it was again, low, throaty, coming from somewhere up ahead. It didn't sound like a bear, not like anything I'd ever heard. I reached for the radio, my hand hovering over it for a second before I thought better of it. I didn't want to sound jumpy. Not yet. Instead, I started forward, more cautiously now, one hand on the butt of my rifle, my boots crunching softly on the gravelly path. The growl came again, this time louder, closer. It seemed to be coming from just beyond the next rise, where the trees thinned out into a small clearing. I approached slowly, peeking through the branches, and that's when I saw it. The clearing was empty, but the ground wasn't. There were deep gouges in the dirt, huge, uneven marks that looked like something had been dragged through. The ground was torn up, the soil scattered like something heavy had barreled through without any care for what was in its way. I crouched down, running my fingers over one of the marks. Whatever made these... It wasn't a bear. Bears didn't leave prints like this, and they didn't leave claw marks that deep. I stood up, feeling a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. Something wasn't right. The growl came again, and this time it was so close I could feel the vibration in my chest. I turned, rifle in hand, scanning the tree line, the shadows lengthening as the last of the daylight slipped away. The wind had died, and the forest was too still, like it was holding its breath, waiting. I clicked the safety off my rifle, stepping carefully through the clearing, my heart pounding harder now. The growl was gone, replaced by an eerie silence, and I just knew that something was watching me. Then I saw the eyes. They were just visible between the trees at the edge of the clearing, glowing faintly in the low light. Not yellow like a bear's eyes, but a sickly, unnatural white, staring right at me. My breath hitched, and for a second I couldn't move. Then the thing stepped into the clearing. It was massive, easily 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur, but it moved with a strange, unsettling grace. The way its limbs hung, too long for its body, and the way it seemed to glide over the ground, as if it wasn't really touching it at all. I raised my rifle, my hands shaking. "Get back," I muttered, though I knew it couldn't understand me. My voice sounded weak, lost in the quiet. The thing didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, its head cocked slightly to the side like it was curious. But I could see the tension in its muscles, the way it was coiled, ready to spring. My finger hovered over the trigger, and for a split second I considered firing, but something in the way it stared at me, so calculating, made me hesitate. Then it growled again, louder this time, so loud it rattled my bones, vibrating through the air, through the ground, through me. I took a step back, my breath coming faster now. "Stay back," I repeated, my voice shaking. The thing took a step forward. I fired. The shot rang out, deafening in the stillness, echoing off the trees. The thing didn't flinch, didn't even blink. It just kept coming, slow and steady, those pale eyes locked on me. I stumbled back, my heart racing, trying to steady the rifle for another shot. But before I could pull the trigger, it was on me. It moved so fast, faster than anything that big had any right to move. 1 second it was across the clearing, and the next it was towering over me, its breath hot and rancid in my face. I swung the rifle up, but it batted it aside like it was nothing, the force of the blow knocking me off my feet. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me, my vision spinning. I scrambled to get up, but the thing was right there, its massive hand pinning me down, pressing me into the dirt. I tried to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. My chest was tight, my breath shallow, panic flooding every part of me. And then, just as suddenly as it had attacked, it stopped. It released me, stepping back, those glowing eyes watching me carefully. I lay there, gasping for breath, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The thing stood over me for a long moment, its breath heavy in the cold night air. Then, without a sound, it turned and disappeared back into the trees, leaving me lying there, shaking and alone in the clearing. I stayed there for what felt like hours, staring up at the sky, trying to convince myself it was over. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't. I knew that thing was still out there, watching, waiting, and I had no idea what it wanted. When I finally made it back to the truck, I didn't bother calling it in. There was no way I could explain what had just happened, no way anyone would believe me, but as I drove back toward the ranger station, hands still trembling on the wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest wasn't mine anymore. It never really had been. Story 17. The claw marks on the tree were fresh, still oozing sap. They were also impossibly high, at least 10 feet off the ground. I've been a hiking guide in these mountains for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like it. As I stared at those gouges, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the crisp mountain air. Something was out there. Something big. My name is Mei Chen, and I lead hiking tours through the Cascade Mountains. Today's group was small, just 4 city folks looking for a taste of the wilderness. Little did I know we were about to get more than we bargained for. "All right, gang," I said, turning to face my group with what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "Let's take 5 here. Catch your breath, have some water. We've got another hour to the campsite." They nodded gratefully, dropping their packs and stretching sore muscles. I could see the wonder in their eyes as they took in the towering pines and distant snow-capped peaks. It was why I loved this job, sharing the beauty of nature with others. But as I turned back to those claw marks, that sense of wonder was replaced by a gnawing unease. "Hey, May, what are you looking at?" It was Tom, the accountant from Seattle. Always curious, always asking questions. I hesitated. No need to spook them unnecessarily. Just some interesting marks on this tree, probably a bear. Tom frowned, craning his neck to look up. "Awful high for a bear, isn't it?" Before I could answer, a twig snapped in the underbrush. We all turned, peering into the dense foliage. "Probably just a deer," I said, more to convince myself than the others. But the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. We pressed on, the mood noticeably tenser. I found myself constantly scanning the trees, jumping at every rustle of leaves. The others picked up on my unease, their excited chatter dying down to nervous whispers. As we neared the campsite, I noticed more strange signs. Broken branches too high up to be from any normal animal, tufts of coarse dark fur caught on thorny bushes, and always that feeling of being watched. We reached the clearing just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Under normal circumstances, it would have been breathtaking, but all I could think about was getting everyone settled and secure for the night. "Okay, folks," I said, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. "Let's get camp set up before we lose the light. Tom and Sarah, you're on tent duty. Mike and Lisa, let's get a fire going." As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being observed. Every time I looked to the tree line, I half expected to see a pair of eyes glowing in the gathering darkness. With camp established and dinner cooking over the fire, some of the tension began to ease. The group chatted and laughed, sharing stories and passing around a flask of whiskey. But I remained on edge, my eyes constantly drawn to the shadows beyond our little circle of firelight. "Earth to May," Sarah said, waving a hand in front of my face. "You okay? You seem a million miles away." I blinked, forcing a smile. "Sorry, just taking in the scenery." She followed my gaze to the dark forest. "It's beautiful, but kind of creepy at night, huh? All those weird sounds." As if on cue, a low, rumbling sound echoed through the trees. It wasn't quite a growl, not quite a roar, but it was loud and close and like nothing I'd ever heard before. The conversation around the fire died instantly. 4 pairs of wide eyes turned to me, silently pleading for reassurance. "Probably just a bear," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nothing to worry about. They usually avoid humans." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Whatever had made that sound was no ordinary bear. "Maybe we should head back in the morning," Mike suggested, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. I nodded slowly. "Might not be a bad idea. Let's get some sleep and we'll reassess at first light." No one argued. We doused the fire and retreated to our tents, an uneasy silence falling over the camp. Sleep didn't come easy. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had me bolt upright, straining my ears in the darkness. The others weren't faring much better. I could hear them tossing and turning, whispering nervously to each other. It was just past midnight when I heard it, heavy footsteps circling our camp. Slow, deliberate, like whatever it was, knew we were aware of its presence and was savoring our fear. I reached for my flashlight with trembling hands, debating whether to look outside. Part of me was desperate to see what was out there. Another part was terrified of what I might find. A scream shattered the night. Sarah burst out of her tent, eyes wild with panic. "There's something out there," she cried. "I saw it. It's huge." The others emerged, sleep-tousled and confused. I tried to calm them down, to bring some order to the chaos, but my own heart was racing. That's when I saw it. A massive silhouette at the edge of our camp, easily 8 feet tall. In the dim moonlight, I could make out a vaguely humanoid shape but covered in thick fur. Its eyes caught the light, glowing an eerie yellow. "Oh my God," Tom whispered. "What is that thing?" I didn't have an answer. My mind raced through everything I knew about the local wildlife, but nothing came close to explaining what I was seeing. The creature took a step forward, into the clearing. Its movements were oddly fluid for something so large. Another step. We were frozen, unable to run, unable to look away. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of sharp teeth, and let out that same rumbling sound we'd heard earlier. But this close, it almost sounded like words. "Leave," it growled. "This place, not yours." I blinked, sure I must be hallucinating. But the others had heard it too, judging by their shocked expressions. We'll go," I managed to stammer out. "First thing in the morning. We don't mean any harm." The creature regarded us silently for a long moment. Then, with surprising grace, it turned and melted back into the forest. We stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the spot where it had vanished. Finally, Mike broke the silence. "What the hell was that?" he asked, voice shaking. I shook my head slowly. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like it." "We need to get out of here," Lisa said. "Now. I don't care if it's the middle of the night." Part of me wanted to agree. to pack up and run, to put as much distance between us and that thing as possible. But the rational part of my brain knew that stumbling through the woods in the dark was a recipe for disaster. "We wait until dawn," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We'll break camp and head back first thing, but for now, we stick together. No one leaves the group, understood?" They nodded, still too shocked to argue. We huddled together in the center of the camp, taking turns keeping watch. None of us slept. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the trees, we packed up in record time. The hike back was tense and silent, everyone jumping at the slightest sound. It wasn't until we reached the trailhead, our cars in sight, that anyone spoke. "What do we tell people?" Sarah asked quietly. I hesitated. The truth sounded insane, even to me. Who would believe us? "Nothing," I said finally. "We say nothing. Who would believe us anyway?" The others nodded slowly, relief mingling with lingering fear on their faces. As we parted ways, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives had changed irrevocably. We had seen something that shouldn't exist, something that challenged everything we thought we knew about the world. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying the encounter over and over. Part of me wanted to convince myself it had all been some kind of shared hallucination, but I knew better. There were things out there in the deep woods and wild places, things that defied explanation, and now that I knew they existed, I could never look at the wilderness the same way again. As I pulled into my driveway, I made a decision. I would go back. Not with a tour group, but alone. I needed to understand what we had seen, to make sense of it somehow. Because if there was one thing I knew for certain, it was that the creature in the woods wasn't a monster. It was something ancient, something that had been there long before us. And maybe, just maybe, it had something to teach us about our place in the natural world. The wilderness had revealed its secrets to me. Now it was up to me to decide what to do with that knowledge. Story 18. The snap of a twig jolted me awake, my heart leaping into my throat. As I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, ears straining in the darkness, I realized with growing terror that the sounds coming from just outside my tent were far too big to be any normal forest creature. My name is Fatima Nazari, and I'm an experienced solo hiker. I've traversed some of the most challenging trails across North America, from the rugged Appalachian Mountains to the vast wilderness of Alaska. But nothing in my years of outdoor adventure could have prepared me for what I encountered in the remote backcountry of Olympic National Park. It was supposed to be a routine 4-day trek through some of the park's less traveled areas. I'd carefully planned my route, packed my ultralight gear, and left a detailed itinerary with the park rangers. As I set out that first morning, the air was crisp with the promise of early autumn, the ancient forests around me a riot of golden and crimson leaves. The first 2 days were uneventful, filled with the quiet solitude I'd come to love about solo hiking. But as I made camp on the third night, in a small clearing nestled between towering cedars, an uneasy feeling began to creep over me. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet, the usual chorus of birdsong and insect noise conspicuously absent. I tried to shake off the feeling as I went through my evening routine, setting up my tent, filtering water from a nearby stream, preparing a simple meal of dehydrated pasta. But I couldn't escape the sensation of being watched, of eyes following my every move from the deepening shadows between the trees. "Get a grip, Fatima," I muttered to myself as I crawled into my tent. "You're just letting your imagination run wild." I zipped myself into my sleeping bag, the familiar cocoon usually bringing a sense of security. But sleep eluded me. Every rustle of wind through the trees, every distant call of an owl set my nerves on edge. It was well past midnight when I finally drifted into a fitful slumber. The snap of the twig came hours later, jolting me back to wakefulness. I lay perfectly still, barely daring to breathe, as I listened intently. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of something large moving around my campsite. My first thought was bear. I'd encountered black bears before, and while they could be dangerous, they were usually more interested in food than people. But as I listened to the heavy footsteps circling my tent, a chill ran down my spine. This didn't move like a bear. The gait was all wrong, bipedal, deliberate. A low, rumbling growl vibrated through the air, raising the hair on the back of my neck. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, not quite animal, not quite human. My mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Cougar, wolf, some sort of feral human. I reached for my headlamp with trembling fingers, debating whether to turn it on. Would the light scare the creature away or provoke it into attacking? As I weighed my options, a new sound froze the blood in my veins. Sniffing, loud and deliberate, right next to my head. Whatever was out there, it was trying to catch my scent. I held my breath, my heart pounding so hard I was sure the creature must be able to hear it. The sniffing continued, moving slowly around the perimeter of the tent. I could hear its breathing now, deep and rhythmic, far too close for comfort. Suddenly, a massive shadow fell across the tent, backlit by the star-filled sky. My eyes widened in disbelief. The silhouette was vaguely humanoid, but enormous, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long arms. A whimper escaped my throat before I could stop it. The shadow shifted, and I knew with certainty that the creature was now looking directly at me through the thin fabric of the tent. For a long moment neither of us moved. I lay there, paralyzed with fear, as the creature stood motionless outside. Then, slowly, deliberately, it raised one massive hand and pressed it against the side of the tent. I could see every detail of that hand through the fabric, the long, curved claws, the thick fur covering the back, the surprisingly human-like shape of the fingers. It was larger than my entire head. "Please," I whispered, though I knew reasoning with this creature was futile. "Please don't hurt me." The hand withdrew, and for a brief, hopeful moment I thought it might be leaving. But then I heard a new sound, the slow, metallic rasp of the tent's zipper being pulled open. Panic surged through me. In a burst of desperate energy, I lunged for my backpack, fumbling for the bear spray I kept in an easily accessible pocket. My fingers closed around the canister just as the tent flap began to open. I aimed blindly towards the opening and pressed down on the trigger, sending a cloud of capsaicin spray into the night air. An ear-splitting roar shook the very ground, followed by the sound of something massive thrashing about outside the tent. Not waiting to see if the spray had deterred the creature, I burst out of my sleeping bag and through the opposite side of the tent, ripping through the fabric in my haste. The cool night air hit me like a shock as I sprinted into the forest, heedless of the direction, driven only by the primal need to escape. Branches whipped at my face as I ran, roots threatening to trip me in the darkness, but the sounds of pursuit spurred me on, the creature's roars of pain and anger echoing through the trees behind me. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. But still I pushed on. Eventually, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by the normal noises of the nighttime forest. As the adrenaline began to wear off, reason slowly returned. I was lost, alone in the wilderness, with no supplies and no idea which direction would lead me back to civilization. I slowed to a walk, trying to get my bearings. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn when I heard the most beautiful sound I could imagine, the distant whop, whop, whop of helicopter rotors. I stumbled towards the sound, waving my arms frantically as the search and rescue helicopter came into view. As they winched me up to safety, I couldn't help but look back at the vast expanse of forest below. Somewhere out there, hidden in the shadows of those ancient trees, was a creature that defied explanation. The official report listed my experience as a bear encounter, despite my insistence that what I'd seen was something else entirely. The park rangers found my campsite torn apart, with tracks they attributed to a large black bear. But I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. I still hike, still love the wilderness, but I never go alone anymore. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispers through the trees just right, I swear I can hear that low, rumbling growl, a reminder that there are things in this world beyond our understanding, creatures that lurk just beyond the edge of firelight, waiting. As I settled into the helicopter seat, exhausted and shaken, one of the rescue team members handed me a bottle of water. "You're lucky we found you," he said, having to shout over the noise of the rotors. "What happened out there?" I took a long drink, buying myself time to think. How could I explain what I'd encountered? Would anyone believe me? I'm not sure, I finally said, my voice hoarse. It was dark. I panicked. The team member nodded sympathetically, clearly used to dealing with rattled hikers. But as we flew over the vast expanse of forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere down there, a pair of intelligent, inhuman eyes were watching our departure. I may never know exactly what I encountered in those woods, but I do know that the experience has changed me forever. The wilderness, once a source of solace and adventure, now holds a hint of mystery and danger that I can never quite shake. And sometimes in my dreams, I still see that massive silhouette against the starry sky, a reminder that there are some secrets the forest keeps for itself. Story 19. Claire went missing, and that's when everything changed. One moment she was right there beside me, laughing, hiking ahead on the trail like always. The next, her footsteps stopped, her voice vanished, and the silence closed in around me like a weight I couldn't shake. I called her name over and over, but the forest swallowed it whole. There was no echo, no rustle of leaves in reply, just the eerie stillness of the valley and the terrible certainty that something had taken her. We weren't supposed to be here. That was clear from the moment we stepped off the main trail and into the valley. The sign back at the ranger station had warned us, "Stay on marked paths. No entry beyond this point. Hazardous terrain." But Claire, stubborn, impulsive Claire, had seen the valley from a distance with its hidden grove of trees, the sloping hills, and that sparkling river winding through it. It looked perfect, untouched, like a paradise no one else had discovered. "Come on, Ethan," she'd said, flashing that smile that always got me into trouble. "It's not that far. What's the worst that could happen?" Those words echoed in my head now, mocking me as I stood there in the dead silence of the valley, staring into the spot where she'd been just moments before. My heart pounded against my chest, louder than my voice as I called her name again. "Claire!" My voice cracked, desperate now. "Claire, where are you?" Nothing. No sound. Not even the birds or the wind, just that suffocating quiet, like the forest itself had closed its mouth around me. My legs felt heavy, frozen in place as my eyes scanned the trees, the rocks, every inch of this place that had suddenly become hostile, unknowable. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I checked for service. Nothing. No signal out here, of course. The last bar had flickered out an hour ago when we decided to wander off the path. "God damn it, Claire," I whispered under my breath, fighting the panic rising in my throat. I turned in a slow circle, searching for some sign, anything. But the trail was gone, swallowed by the thick trees and underbrush, and there was no sign of Claire. No broken branches, no footprints in the soft earth. It was like she had just disappeared. I knelt down, touching the ground where I last saw her, my fingers brushing over the damp leaves. Nothing felt right. The air was too still, too thick, and the shadows around me seemed to shift, stretching longer than they should have. The valley had felt open and inviting at first, but now it felt like it was closing in. "Okay," I muttered to myself, trying to keep calm, trying to think. "She's got to be close. She can't just vanish." I pushed through the underbrush, moving quickly, my breath coming faster, trying to retrace her steps, trying to figure out where she might have gone. But there was no sign of her, no tracks, no sound, just the oppressive quiet and the creeping sensation that I wasn't alone anymore. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I froze, listening. For a second I thought I heard something, just a faint rustling in the trees. "Claire?" I called again, my voice shaky now, the panic starting to claw at the edges of my mind. No answer. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I needed to find her, needed to stay calm. I took a few more steps forward, the ground soft beneath my boots, squinting into the thick woods ahead. The shadows were darker here, the trees closer together, and the air felt thick, almost heavy, like it was pressing down on me. Then I heard it. A voice, faint, far off, but familiar. "Ethan." My heart skipped a beat. It was Claire. I turned toward the sound, hope surging through me. "Claire, where are you?" But her voice didn't answer. Instead, it called my name again. Soft, distant. "Ethan." It didn't sound right. Something about it was off. Too flat, too quiet, like it was coming from underwater. My stomach twisted, and the hope I'd felt just seconds ago turned into something else, something colder. I pushed forward anyway, because what else could I do? The trees were thick, the ground uneven, and every step felt harder than the last, like the valley itself was trying to slow me down. But I kept going, following the faint sound of Claire's voice, trying to convince myself that she was okay, that she was just lost. Then I saw it. A clearing, small and unnaturally still, and in the center of it, Claire stood with her back to me. Relief flooded me, and I stumbled toward her, my voice breaking with relief. "Claire, thank God I—" But she didn't move. I stopped in my tracks, the breath catching in my throat. Something was wrong. She was too still, her back rigid, arms hanging unnaturally at her sides. My skin prickled with unease, and I took a step closer, the leaves crunching under my boots. "Claire?" I said again, quieter this time. No response. My mouth went dry. I took another cautious step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Claire," I repeated, my voice trembling now, "are you okay?" Then, slowly, she turned, and I realized it wasn't Claire. Not really. It looked like her, the same brown hair, the same clothes, but her face, it wasn't right. Her eyes were too wide, her skin too pale, and her mouth was twisted into a smile that didn't belong there, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ethan," she said again, in that same flat, unnatural voice. I stepped back, my breath hitching, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run. This wasn't Claire, this was something else, something that had taken her place. What the hell?" I whispered, my hands shaking. "What are you?" The thing wearing Claire's face didn't answer. It just kept smiling, its head tilting slightly to the side, like it was studying me. Then, slowly, it started to move toward me, its footsteps soft and deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. I stumbled back, my mind racing, trying to understand what was happening, what this thing was. But nothing made sense. Nothing felt real anymore. The valley around me seemed to shift, the trees bending in ways they shouldn't, the shadows crawling closer. I turned and ran. Branches whipped at my face, my lungs burning as I tore through the trees, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I didn't know where I was going, I just needed to get away. Away from whatever had taken Claire, away from the valley that now felt like a trap, closing in around me. Behind me, I heard her voice again. "Ethan." Closer this time, too close. I pushed myself harder, my legs screaming with every step, the trees blurring around me. I had no idea how far I'd gone, no idea how long I'd been running. I just knew I couldn't stop. Not until I was out of this place, away from that thing that wore my best friend's face like a mask. Finally, I burst through the trees and into the open air, my boots skidding on the rocky ground. The valley stretched out before me, and in the distance I could see the faint outline of the main trail, the one we'd left behind hours ago. I didn't stop running until I was back on that trail, gasping for breath, my legs shaking so badly I thought I might collapse. I bent over, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath, my mind spinning with the horror of what had just happened. But when I finally looked up, the valley behind me was quiet again. Peaceful, even. No sign of the thing that had taken Claire. No sign of her at all. I reached for my phone, my hands still trembling, and checked it again. Still no signal. I stood there for a long time, staring into the valley, my breath slowly evening out, and then, slowly, I turned and started walking back toward the ranger station, back toward safety. I didn't look back. They never found Claire's body. I told the rangers she got lost, that I couldn't find her. They searched the valley for days, but they never found a trace, no footprints, no gear, nothing. It was like she had vanished into thin air, but I know what I saw, and I know she's still out there, or at least something that looks like her is. Story 20. The echo wasn't right. In all my years of caving, I'd never heard anything like it. It was too deep, too alive. As I stood there, headlamp cutting through the darkness, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cave's cool air. Something was down here with me. Something that shouldn't exist. My name is Diego Alvarez, and I'm a geologist specializing in cave formations. I've explored some of the deepest, darkest places on Earth. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found in the depths of Shadow Canyon. The day had started normally enough. I'd geared up at the mouth of the cave, double-checking my equipment and going over my planned route. This was supposed to be a routine survey, mapping out a newly discovered branch of the cave system. "You sure about going in alone, Diego?" my research assistant Jenna had asked as I prepared to descend. I'd flashed her a confident grin. "I'll be fine. You know I work best solo. Besides, someone needs to man the comm station." She'd rolled her eyes but nodded. "All right, just be careful down there. This section hasn't been fully mapped yet. We don't know what's waiting." If only I'd listened to her. 3 hours in, I'd made good progress. The new tunnel was a geologist's dream, twisting passages lined with stunning stalactites and flowstone formations. I'd taken dozens of samples, my excitement growing with each new discovery. That's when I heard it. A low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the very rock itself. At first I thought it might be distant water or settling stone. But as I paused to listen, I realized it was something else entirely. Something that sent a primal jolt of fear through my body. "Jenna," I radioed, trying to keep the unease out of my voice. "You getting any seismic activity on the monitors?" Static crackled, then her voice came through, tinny and distant. "Negative, Diego. All readings normal. Why, you feeling something?" I hesitated. How could I explain what I'd heard without sounding crazy? Just thought I felt a tremor. Probably nothing. "Well, if you're unsure, maybe you should head back. We can always finish the survey another day." Part of me wanted to agree, to turn around and head for the safety of the surface. But my scientific curiosity won out. I had to know what was causing that sound. "Nah, I'm good," I replied. "Probably just my imagination. I'll check in again in an hour." I clicked off the radio before she could argue and pressed deeper into the cave. The passage narrowed, forcing me to squeeze through tight gaps in the rock. My headlamp illuminated bizarre formations, rock twisted into shapes that defied geological explanation, and always that low, rumbling sound grew louder. Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. My light couldn't reach the ceiling, giving the illusion of an underground sky. But it was what I saw on the walls that stopped me in my tracks. Cave paintings, hundreds of them, stretching as far as I could see. But these weren't the usual hunting scenes or handprints. These depicted something else. A massive, humanoid figure, covered in fur. In some images it was hunting, in others it seemed to be worshipped. "What the hell?" I muttered, approaching the nearest painting for a closer look. That's when I saw the footprint, pressed into a patch of soft clay, perfectly preserved. It was huge, easily twice the size of my own foot, and unmistakably bipedal. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This had to be some kind of hoax, right? But who would go to such elaborate lengths, so deep underground? A scraping sound echoed through the chamber like stone grinding on stone. I whirled around, heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. If there was something down here, I'd just given away my position. Silence answered me. Then another scrape, closer this time. And with it, a smell, musty and wild, like wet fur and earth. I fumbled for my radio. Jenna, come in." Static. I was too deep. The signal couldn't penetrate the rock. Another sound. A low, rumbling growl that I felt more than heard. It was the same sound I'd been following, but now it was right behind me. Slowly, I turned. My headlamp illuminated a wall of matted fur. I craned my neck up until I met a pair of eyes that glowed in the darkness. They were intelligent eyes, ancient eyes. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body refused to obey. Then it spoke. The sound was like boulders grinding together, barely recognizable as language. But somehow, I understood. "Why? Here." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as dust. "I'm studying. The cave. I didn't know anyone was down here." The creature's head tilted, regarding me with an unsettling intensity. "Not anyone, something." I nodded, afraid to disagree. What are you?" A low rumble that might have been a laugh. Older than your kind. We sleep. We wait." "Wait for what?" I asked, curiosity momentarily overriding my fear. The creature's eyes narrowed. "Change, always change." Before I could ask more, it raised a massive clawed hand. I flinched, but it simply pointed towards the tunnel I'd come through. "Go!" it growled. "Not safe. Not for you." I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran, heart pounding in my ears. The sound of heavy footsteps followed, always just behind me, urging me on. I burst out of the cave entrance, gasping for air. Jenna was there, her eyes wide with concern. "Diego, what happened? You've been out of radio contact for hours." I opened my mouth to explain, but no words came out. How could I possibly describe what I'd seen? As the adrenaline faded, doubt began to creep in. Had it all been real, or some kind of hallucination brought on by cave gases or oxygen deprivation? I looked back at the cave entrance. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a pair of glowing eyes watching from the shadows. Then they were gone. "Diego," Jenna pressed, her voice tinged with worry. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. "I'm not sure, but I think we need to seal off that new passage, at least until we can do a more thorough survey." She frowned, clearly confused. "What? Why? Did you find something dangerous?" I hesitated. "You could say that. Look, I'll explain everything back at base camp, but for now, let's just get out of here." As we packed up our gear, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The creature's words echoed in my mind. We sleep. We wait. What were they waiting for? And what would happen when they decided it was time to wake up? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing for certain. The world was bigger, stranger, and far more mysterious than I'd ever imagined. and I had a feeling my encounter in Shadow Canyon was just the beginning. As we drove away from the site, I made a silent vow. I would come back. I would uncover the truth about what lived in those depths. Because if there was one thing my years as a geologist had taught me, it was that the Earth still held secrets, and some of them were very much alive. The cave paintings flashed through my mind, images of a creature worshipped as a god. Maybe our ancestors had known something we'd forgotten. Maybe there were things in this world that defied scientific explanation. Or maybe I was losing my mind. Either way, I knew my life would never be the same. The solid ground of rationality I'd built my career on had shifted, revealing depths I never knew existed, and like any good explorer, I was drawn to the unknown. As the sun set behind us, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I couldn't help but smile. The world had just gotten a whole lot bigger, and I couldn't wait to see what other wonders, or horrors, it held. The adventure, it seemed, was just beginning. Story 21. The first time I heard it, I told myself it was just the wind. You hear all kinds of things when you're alone in the woods, especially as night starts to fall. The trees creak, the leaves rustle, and sometimes, if you're tired enough, your mind starts filling in the gaps. But this wasn't that. This was something else. The kind of sound that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up before you even realize what's wrong. It had been a long day, one of those shifts where everything felt like it was dragging. I was the only ranger on duty that evening, making the final rounds before nightfall. The park was mostly empty, which suited me fine. Less to worry about, fewer fires to put out. It was late October, and the cold air had settled in, biting at my skin as I made my way down the last stretch of the trail. The woods were quiet, just the way I liked them. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person for miles. I took a deep breath, letting the scent of pine and damp earth fill my lungs, the sound of my boots crunching on the gravel underfoot. That's when I heard it. At first, it was just a faint howl in the distance, low, drawn out and carried on the wind. I stopped, turning toward the sound, squinting through the trees. It wasn't a wolf. Too deep, too slow. My pulse quickened, but I told myself it was just an animal. Coyotes, maybe, or a distant echo of something more mundane. Nothing to worry about. I kept walking, pulling my jacket tighter around me as the sky darkened. The sun had dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the path. The trail ahead was swallowed by the creeping twilight, but I knew it well enough to navigate even without light. I figured I'd head back to the station soon, just finish my last check and call it a night. The howl came again, this time closer, louder. I froze, every instinct telling me to listen. My hand went to the radio on my belt, fingers brushing over the cold metal. For a second I considered calling it in, just to have someone else aware of it, but I stopped myself. No need to overreact. It was probably just a big coyote, or maybe a deer, making one of those weird sounds they do when they're startled. Still, there was something about the way it cut through the air, the way it made my skin prickle. I walked a little faster now, my boots crunching loudly in the silence that followed. The trees loomed on either side of me, branches twisting together like skeletal fingers. The deeper I went, the heavier the air seemed to get, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Then I heard it again. This time, a low, rumbling growl. Not far off. I stopped dead in my tracks, heart pounding. That wasn't a coyote. Hell, it wasn't anything I'd ever heard before. My eyes scanned the darkening forest, searching for movement, for anything out of place. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves, making it harder to tell where the sound was coming from. "Come on, Lucas," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the rising unease. "You've been out here 100 times. It's nothing." But my gut wasn't buying it. I started moving again, this time more deliberately, keeping my ears open, every step feeling heavier than the last. My breath came faster, and I could feel the cold seeping deeper into my skin. The trail ahead curved sharply, disappearing into the trees, and I told myself once I made it around the bend, I'd head back. No point pushing it. But as I rounded the corner, I saw them. Tracks. Big ones. Deep, fresh, and unmistakably not from any animal I knew. They cut across the trail, leading into the thick underbrush. The pattern uneven but deliberate. I crouched down, running my hand over the indentations in the dirt. Whatever made these was heavy, too heavy to be a deer, too wide to be a bear. My heart raced as I traced the edges of the prints, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. That's when the howl came again, closer, almost right behind me. I stood up fast, whipping around, my eyes scanning the dark woods. The shadows seemed to shift, the trees creaking in the wind. But there was no sign of anything, no movement, no glowing eyes in the underbrush, just the faint rustle of leaves and the distant echo of that low, haunting sound. I grabbed the radio, my hand shaking slightly. "Base, this is Ranger Lucas. You copy?" Static crackled through the speaker, followed by a faint, garbled reply. "Go ahead, Lucas." I hesitated, glancing around again. "I'm out near the East Trail. Heard something strange. Not sure what it is, but it doesn't sound like any animal I've heard before. Just wanted to give you a heads up." There was a pause, then, "You think it's dangerous?" "I don't know yet. Probably not." I tried to keep my voice steady, but the unease had settled in deep. "I'll check it out and report back." "All right, stay safe." I clipped the radio back to my belt and turned toward the direction of the tracks. Every instinct told me to turn around, to head back to the station and call it a night. But something pulled me forward. Curiosity? Maybe. Or maybe it was just the unsettling feeling of being watched, of not wanting to leave without knowing what was out there. I followed the tracks, my flashlight cutting through the growing darkness, the beam dancing over twisted roots and gnarled branches. The deeper I went, the quieter the woods became. Not even the wind seemed to reach this far. The tracks led me off the main trail, winding through dense underbrush and thick trees. My breath came in shallow bursts, the cold air stinging my lungs. The growl came again, this time closer, reverberating through the air. My heart pounded as I gripped the flashlight tighter, sweeping it back and forth across the trees. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified in the thick, suffocating silence. I pushed forward, every step feeling heavier, like the forest itself didn't want me there. Then I saw it. A figure, just barely visible through the trees. I stopped dead, my breath catching in my throat. The light barely reached it, but I could see enough, a tall, hulking shape standing unnaturally still. Its eyes, glowing faintly, reflected the beam of my flashlight, watching me. My heart raced, adrenaline flooding my system as I tried to process what I was seeing. It didn't move, didn't growl, just stood there like it was waiting. I took a step back, my mind racing. What the hell? Before I could finish the thought, the figure shifted. Not much, just a slight tilt of its head, like it was sizing me up. My hand instinctively went to the radio, but I didn't pull it out. Instead, I backed away slowly, keeping the flashlight trained on the thing. My breath was coming in shallow gasps now, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then, without warning, it moved. Fast, too fast. I stumbled back, tripping over a root, my flashlight swinging wildly as I hit the ground hard. Pain shot through my side, but I barely registered it. The figure was gone, vanished into the trees like it had never been there. I scrambled to my feet, heart racing, flashlight shaking in my hand. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. Not yet. I scanned the woods, the beam of light darting across the trees, searching for any sign of the thing. Nothing. Just the oppressive silence. I stood there for what felt like hours, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my eyes locked on the dark woods around me. The wind picked up again, rustling the leaves, breaking the eerie stillness. But I knew it was still out there, watching, waiting. And whatever it wasn't afraid of me. I didn't wait to find out what it wanted. I turned and bolted back down the trail, the sound of my boots pounding against the dirt, the wind whipping past my ears. The radio crackled faintly on my belt, but I didn't stop to answer. I just ran, faster than I ever had before, not daring to look back. When I finally reached the station, my chest heaving, I slammed the door behind me and collapsed into the nearest chair, my heart still racing, my mind still reeling from what I'd seen. But I knew one thing for sure. That thing, it wasn't gone. Not really. And it would be back.